Throughout the halls of great literary talents and outstanding accomplished artists, there lies a single unifying act. The creation of art is a skill. Like any other, it can be sharpened, honed, augmented to surpass limitations imposed by inexperience. To create anything would warrant the label of artist. However, when one seeks to push all of their acquired knowledge and talent to their full potential, we have an appropriate name carved out for just such an occasion: the magnum opus, one great work. Latin, this is a phrase I have used to describe Deltarune several times in the past. This is my choice, by the way. I don't know if Toby Fox would ever refer to it as such, however, I truly feel this name is fitting. In the year 2015, Undertale was first exposed to the gaming world. It arrived, several people played it, even more people crafted theories about it. It doesn't matter when you first entered the underground, all that mattered is if you allowed it to change you. A novel concept for its time, and definitely not something that was widely mainstream either. The RPG game where you don't have to destroy anyone. A game which followed a similar path to its inspiration with the caveat of choice: mercy or aggression. You had the freedom to choose how to handle any and all combat encounters to one extreme or another. Undertale did not spearhead the idea of a no mercy run within an RPG, but it definitely took notice if you did. This was Toby Fox's first game, and to be so successful so early, it left many wondering where he would go from here. And in 2018, we received our answer.
Undertale 2! So this game came out, it's called Deltarune.
Oh, hell yeah!
Please give it a gift. Oh my god, there's so much going on here. What is this?
Toby, what are you doing? You have a lot of explaining to do, man.
I don't know how much this is actually going to affect things. So, knowing these types of games, this is going to mean a lot or all.
The strongest puzzle? How could we possibly? I'm stuck at the puzzle. What could I possibly do? Am I actually dumb? Like, is this ironically supposed to be a hard puzzle? Oh. Oh my god. Oh my god. Oh my god. He made it seem like it was more and I thought it was. Shut up!
Hello again, people, and welcome to the ultimate analysis of Deltarune Chapter 1. Ultimate is in parentheses, and yes, I know the use of the word is very assumptive. Today we are covering everything surrounding the narrative of Chapter 1. We are in a fortuitous time in Deltarune's history where there is more Deltarune released than there is not. I had my reservations on doing a video like this in the past. However, given that Deltarune Chapter 1 has received very little in terms of content updates, and it will most likely stay that way for at least a few years, I think it's best to strike when the iron is hot. Or, well, slightly lukewarm. Chapter 1's been out for several years. Today we will cover the entirety of Chapter 1, characters, story arcs, themes, and the oh so many setups that will hopefully be paid off towards the end. If it's in Chapter 1, it'll be in this video, unless I forgot about it. Let's begin. I still remember the day I heard about Deltarune for the first time. I was sitting in my car waiting for my next class to start. Passing the time scrolling through my phone, I randomly found this image. You may recognize this image from Chapter 1, but at the time, it didn't mean anything to me. I had no idea who this was, or what was even going on. What I did know is the line, "all proceeds go to kicking your ass," was pretty funny. I scrolled past with absolutely no knowledge of how that purple dinosaur was going to change my life. A little later, I randomly stumbled across a news article that is probably lost to time by now. The tagline read something along the lines of, "Toby Fox's next big game is not Undertale 2. I had only played Undertale for the first time back in March of that year, but I knew this was big news. I only played Undertale once, pacifist route and all throughout. At the time, I wouldn't say I was the biggest Undertale fan, but I did enjoy the game. And I was also aware how this was going to make a lot of people very excited. I skimmed through the article and I saw a picture of Kris standing in their house, and I thought to myself, wow, this art style looks very familiar. Eventually, I put the puzzle pieces together and realized that that image of that purple dinosaur I saw was from Toby Fox's new game. I made my way over to Deltarune.com where I found this message. Welcome. Please read these final warnings, then take it in your hands. Once you accepted everything that will happen and promise not to talk about whatever was here for at least 24 hours, you find a download link at the bottom. This downloaded an installer that required you to disable your antivirus to run, and once it did, you would get a program installed onto your desktop called... Toby Fox could have simply announced his game just like any other developer. Social media post pointing towards a cryptic video that guided people to a Steam page which held the demo. He could have done this. It wasn't super long after Undertale's release. I'm sure he was still well off after releasing one of the biggest selling games on Steam in 2015. The point is, he had the ability to release his demo the old-fashioned way, but he chose not to. Yeah, that's right, we're not even starting the game yet and we're already analyzing stuff. I would say that Toby Fox realized something after his experience working on Undertale and becoming a bit of an internet celebrity after the response following its release. This is a phenomenon we saw a massive surge in the 2010s. It didn't start there, however it played a massive role in what was popularized at the time. An indie game developer would make a video game, and like any other, it would feature a story. However, there would be another story lurking beneath the surface. Developers have always put interesting side stories or Easter eggs in their games. However, this is where it made or break certain titles. Due to the infectious, mimetic nature of the internet, video game theories and predictions spread like wildfire, effectively offering advertisement that the game devs would otherwise have to pay for. Some people have been able to use this mystery-based storytelling to their advantage. Others, not so much. Toby knew this was an effective way to get people talking about his game. Don't release it on Steam. Boring. Make your own website and installer and frame the game as this program while simultaneously explaining specifically what the game is. This is the canonical beginning to Deltarune, by the way. We, the player, stumble across this website and download the survey program, which contains the Deltarune universe on it. At least that is my understanding at present time. The effectiveness of releasing Deltarune this way is twofold. Get people talking about the game while showing people that this isn't just a regular video game. This is a program, a survey program, which we have installed onto our system. The program talks to us, interacts with us. It acknowledges our presence. We are connected to this story. After we all played this, we were left with a considerable amount of questions, and in a rare display of mercy, Toby saw fit to explain some things in a twit longer. 12 questions answered out of thousands. While I won't go over all of them, I think this is important to cover as it is all we had after Chapter 1 released. So, to start off with the most pertinent of questions, is Deltarune a sequel to Undertale or a prequel? This is not the world of Undertale, and anything that happened in Undertale will not be affected by what happens here, and vice versa. Deltarune's world is a different one, different characters that have lived different lives. Toby explains Deltarune as something you can play after Undertale if you want to, which is such a strange way to describe it. And I'll get to that. Toby goes on to explain a few more things. He needs to put a team together, the Deltarune Avengers, to tackle making this game. He cannot do this himself, so he needs time to amass a few talented individuals. This is something he outright admits while mentioning that there were a few things he wanted to include in Chapter 1, but didn't. Certain changes to the UI, changing the way you found the keys, these were things that probably would have improved the flow of Chapter 1 while making it very similar to the other chapters. But he decided to step away and just release Chapter 1 as it is. This is all capped off by Toby saying that he has no plans for adding more content to Chapter 1 at current time, a statement that may prove to be incorrect. I have heard some people make the argument that Deltarune Chapter 1 could receive an update after the full game is released and finished, so it very well could happen. Just know, for the purposes of this long analysis, I will assume that the chapter will never be touched again, even though it probably will be. Undertale was a game of choice, and it appears that this game is not. Toby is aware that people would expect to make choices that decide the outcome of the story, and it would seem that he has decided to take that away from the player. I find the previously used description of Deltarune so peculiar. This is the hook for me, and it's one of the many reasons why I became so enamored with Deltarune. For the past 3 years, I've been waking up in the middle of the night unable to go back to sleep because I've been thinking about the scenes that happen in this game. There's Deltarune concept art that goes all the way back to 2014, and supposedly the ending of the game came to Toby in a fever dream as far back as 2011. This is a project he has been wanting to make for a very long time. This backstory is why I call Deltarune his magnum opus. I see the spark of creativity, the drive to share what you want to make with people. There is this distinct feeling that artists get when they want to make something. It's present in all of us. We live our lives and it changes us, and as a result, that change is manifested in our work with the same sense of individuality as which we have developed in ourselves. It's just so fun to see someone get the chance to make something they always wanted to make, isn't it? I guarantee you, there are artists out there, talented artists, that have ideas and dreams that may never come to light. A show, a game, a song, a movie, something they want to make more than anything in the world, to then share it with people, because it represents them and everything that they are. Whether we know it or not, a work of fiction is a letter from the creator to the observer. When you make something, it is in direct reference to who you are. This is why I find it so peculiar that Toby explains this piece as something you can play after Undertale, considering this idea came first. Deltarune came before Undertale. Undertale was finished before Deltarune, but the idea of Deltarune came first. Even in its incomplete state, Deltarune is the superior game. I know that there will always be a special place in your hearts for Undertale, likewise. However, even if it's just categorical, Deltarune is the superior work. Chapter 4 especially is the greatest piece of media Toby has ever made, and I cannot wait to make that chapter video. Which reminds me, this entire project is made to talk about Chapter 1, so now I think it's a good time to start. And what better place to start than at the beginning? Oh, but how could I forget? We have to build our character first. This is the Goner Maker sequence. I won't go too much into the technical aspects within the game files, but I will reference file names if need be. This is more specifically a narrative analysis. A disembodied voice welcomes us to this world. This entire sequence is referred to as the Goner Maker because several of the different body parts are labeled as Goner. Goners are a concept that was first explored in Undertale. From what I understand, they are someone who has lost their way in the dimensional pipeline. They are either someone who has ceased to exist due to time travel shenanigans, or they are people who have spent too much time with one WD Gaster and are suffering from gasteritis. Sorry, that's the best I got. It's not like Goners have been explicitly explained to us. The voice is here to greet us, to then go on to explain that we need to make a vessel. Having a personalized avatar makes the experience all the more unique. We can choose from an assortment of heads, torsos, and legs. After we decide on a form, the voice continues. They ask a series of questions about our vessel's interests. What is our vessel's favorite food? What is its favorite blood type? Naturally, we learn from these questions that the vessel is an entity separate from us. Yes, it is our vessel, however, it appears we are molding the mind of this vessel to better suit us. Any seasoned RPG enthusiast would assume this is an artistically unique character creation screen. For the most part, it is. After you have made all of your decisions and have accepted your form, it is all discarded and cast away, never to be remembered again. To further emphasize the weight of this subversion, the dialogue changes. But before we unpack that, let's discuss this section specifically. I'm not the first person to speculate on the opening sequence, and I won't be the last. However, this feels like Schrodinger's setup at times. As unlikely as it may be, there is a possibility this sequence was just used to catch the player off guard, and Kris was always intended to be our vessel. We are not exploring this world on our own. We are being placed into the mind and body of our protagonist. No one can choose who they are in this world. This is the setup of the narrative through-line, which has taken away our choice, or more accurately explained that we never had a choice to begin with. This setup was important, as many people were more than likely expecting choice to be a big facet of this new adventure. It's almost like a mousetrap, giving the player a false sense of security by making them think they are making meaningful choices, asking them superfluous questions like how they feel about their creation. The Goner Maker sequence sets the tone for the narrative to follow. This is the story, and your choices will have little to no influence in how it plays out. The game almost revels in how oppressive it feels to be told that your choices don't matter. This reveal is striking for the player, and it also falls in line with the story we are about to experience. Several characters are in positions where they feel like their choice is not in their possession. Their path is set, and no matter what, the label they were given is all they will hold. There are choices made by those characters which contradict their nature, and as a result, they end up changing what's seen like a predetermined outcome. Expectations can be a fickle thing. A lot of people were taking their Undertale expectations into this, which Toby foresaw. Assuming it would either set them up for disappointment or hinder their enjoyment, he sought to establish a level of understanding early on. The declaration that the game will only have one ending would naturally be disappointing for many people, as one of Undertale's selling points was its plethora of player choice. Considering the developments over the years, it feels like this declaration was not entirely true. We won't get into it now, however, it seems like getting a new ending is not completely out of the player's hands. So now, let's talk about the voices. The initial voice is most widely accepted to be W.D. Gaster. This is most likely the answer, as this voice shares the same speech quirks. Also, if there was ever a character to reach out to us across time and space, it would be him. A character from Undertale, cast adrift in the underground, doing what he can to help the monsters within. Gaster acted as the royal scientist until a freak accident sent him across time and space. One of Undertale's most elusive characters has now returned to bring us here, and we can't help but wonder why. This scene has been mostly ignored or memed by Toby whenever he has the chance to address it, and if these live streams have taught me anything, it's if Toby is ignoring it, then it's very important.
Toby, is there a benefit to blood type? Like, does one give us strength?
Wait and see.
Okay.
As far as overall interpretations go, I see there are two ways that you could interpret this introduction. You could just see this as a plot device. A plot device which was used to address any expectations the player might have regarding this new work. Or, the more fitting route, you could see this as a mission or an assignment. W.D. Gaster has summoned us here because he wants us to do something specific, or he wants to see how our introduction into this world may change the outcome. Now the question turns to, was this meeting interrupted by a separate person which prompted the dialogue to change? Sorry in advance, but I'm going to go ahead and skip ahead, like very far ahead, like the end of chapter 4 ahead. After the credits roll, the voice from the intro greets us once again. They compliment us, stating that the halfway mark has been attained, but our job is not finished. It is waiting for us. My Deltarune. So that was weird, but also illuminating to some degree. Gaster, or the voice, whatever the initial voice which we meet in chapter 1, checks in on us to mark our progress. We have reached the halfway mark of the story at the end of chapter 4, which is weird considering there's 7 chapters. This re-emergence tells me that what happened at the end of the Goner Maker sequence was not a mistake. The voice change was done more so for dramatic effect rather than another person speaking. If my understanding of this initial theory is correct, Gaster brings us into the Deltarune world and is about to put us into our vessel. Before this happens, the other voice cuts in and then forces us to enter Kris's body instead. This is a change of plans that was put into motion by an outside entity, someone separate from Gaster who has their own agenda. However, considering Gaster begins to speak to us again at the end of Chapter 4, I personally believe that everything that happened according to plan. I understand that this means that Gaster was just trolling with the whole vessel creator thing, but honestly it makes sense. If you actually pay attention to the Goner Maker sequence, you'll notice that the options become less varied. Once you get to the legs, most of them are the same. Also, D is not a blood type. It's almost like this whole sequence was hastily put together. As much as it would be interesting that the voice change was indicative of a new person speaking, I don't think this is the case. If there was another force which interrupted our vessel creation, then why would Gaster not mention it? Don't get me wrong, I would totally understand why Gaster wouldn't do anything to stop it. However, he is speaking as if everything is on track. Not a single mention of a hiccup or an extra obstacle or even an unexpected guest. Now obviously, the counter would be that he is unaware of the second person. However, and this is purely headcanon theory crafting time, I feel like if Gaster referred to something as my Deltarune, then it could be interpreted that this is his creation. The survey program, I mean. This is his creation. And if this was his creation, I feel like he would be aware of everything that's happening within it. Somehow, he is able to know when we arrive at the halfway mark. So why would he not be aware of another entity interrupting us as we try to enter our vessel? Even though I don't agree with the interruption, I cannot deny there is a chance that it is still true. We can't begin to understand Gaster's motive because we still have no idea what we're even supposed to be doing here. Like, are we supposed to stop the roaring? Are we trying to save Kris's life? Are we trying to find December? What's the plan there, Gaster?
Science isn't about why, it's about why not.
Gaster, why do you sound like Cave Johnson? Okay, cool. So yeah, that about covers everything. We could briefly talk about the possibility of the vessel returning somehow down the line. The game does save your choices in the form of flags, so just speaking from speculation, there is a chance the vessel could return, and it would be our save design. It would be a nice alternative as opposed to Kris, and it would cement us as an applied actor in the story. The probability of this actually happening is up for debate. If I had to make a guess, I'd wager we may just see the vessel again. Although I don't think it's as simple as it will show up to be our new body when Kris doesn't need us anymore. Speaking of Kris, let's see how they're doing. Plot is the very essence of the story. Without proper understanding of continuity, consistency, clarity, and cohesiveness, your story will suffer. In this portion of the analysis, we will cover the entire plot of Chapter 1 from its humble beginning to its cliffhanger ending. So let's be real here. If you are watching this, there's a very good chance you know how the story goes. Personally, I think I could retell the whole thing from start to finish in my sleep. Chapter 1 has literally been out for 7 years. You know this, I know this. However, I want to try something new by establishing all of the important events in one go. Also, despite Deltarune's popularity, there are people who aren't sure whether they want to get into the game or not. This is a good section for people who are interested in the story, but don't like RPGs, or even if they just want to refresh on the story in general. Typically, I would recap the story chronologically, stopping at various moments to give input and analysis. This time around, I'm going to take the time to recount all of the events of Chapter 1 up front. Doing this will hopefully allow me to not have to reference specific events or scenes when I'm trying to make a point. If you forget anything about Chapter 1, you can simply return to this part of the video to be reminded. After recounting the entire plot, I will proceed under the assumption that all of the setup and context is fulfilled, and we can get into the analysis without breaks. If you can, let me know if you prefer this format, or if you want me to go back to how I used to do it. Also, here's a timestamp so you can just jump ahead to the analysis portion. Begin. Toriel Dreemurr has woken up her child, apprehensive to the idea that both of them will be late to school. Here we meet Kris Dreemurr, our protagonist, the stoic human being we will be controlling for the duration of our stay in the world of Deltarune. Kris awakens in a room with 2 beds. On their side we find an average looking bed with a single empty shelf perched above it. On the opposing side we find a separate bed surrounded by many more personal items. Kris owns but a single empty bird cage inside a red wagon. As we explore the house, we find an abundance of space, greater than what would be required to accommodate 2 people. The kitchen table has space for 4 people, and Toriel has her own room, so it is implied that other people live there. Looking up to the mirror in the hallway will give you the flavor text, "It's only you." On the refrigerator downstairs lies a picture which displays Kris's mother, brother, along with themselves. They walk outside to find their mother waiting for them. They proceed to take a leisurely stroll to school, as Toriel describes how she is anticipating the return of her other child, Jevil Dreemurr. In this world, there are monsters and humans. The specifics of the state of the world and the relationship between these two peoples will be left for speculation. Driving through the town, we can get an initial feel for the world we have been sent to. There are several monsters everywhere, not another human in sight. We arrive at the school, and instead of taking her leave, Toriel helps her child inside before sending them off to class. Toriel is also an instructor at this school, looking after the younger students. Kris enters the classroom, and despite their tardiness, Miss Alphys welcomes them inside, recommending that they find a suitable partner. Kris's class is comprised of 9 students total: Noelle, Birdly, Temmie, Caddy, Monster Kid, Jockington, Snowdrake, and Kris themselves. Brief side note, isn't it so weird that all of the NPCs have names except for Monster Kid? In Undertale, the name Monster Kid made sense because we didn't actually know what their name was. But here it just seems like Monster Kid is their actual name. Kris is unsuccessful in finding a partner, as most other students have decided upon another. Even Temmie seems to be content with partnering with just a hard-boiled egg. Noelle Holiday, Kris's estranged friend, seems to be more open and warm to Kris, offering to make a group of 3 with Birdly. Hey wait, didn't I say this class had 9 students? This is Susie, our deuteragonist. The tension in this room is constricting, as even Alphys is reluctant to criticize Susie for being late. Considering both of them are without a partner, Kris and Susie are now paired together. Susie is absolutely ecstatic after receiving this information. The chalk used for class is now missing, and supposedly Miss Alphys cannot start without it. Noelle initially offers to go with Susie to find some more, and in a burst of anxiety, Alphys sends Kris along with Susie instead. Before walking outside, we can talk to all of our classmates again, all having nothing positive to say about Susie, save for Noelle. Snowdrake in particular boasts the line, "You Suze, you lose," thinking the line to be oh so clever. It would seem there is a wedge between Susie and her classmates, and it's not clear who threw the first stone. Noelle is more open to Susie compared to everyone else. I wonder if there's a specific reason for that. Leaving the classroom, we see that it was Susie who had taken the chalk. Still under the impression she was alone, she takes a bite out of it. She turns around to find Kris, who had witnessed everything, and now the cat is out of the bag. What seems to be a harmless encounter turns to full-on intimidation as she pins Kris against a locker with ease. A mix of fear, resentment, and frustration can be felt from Susie's words, as she does a mock reaction to the notion of her finally being expelled. She is under the impression that no one wants her here, and people would be overjoyed with the idea of her leaving forever. Her intimidation almost turns to second-degree murder as she threatens to bite into Kris's face with intent to kill. She stops, either because she grew cold feet or she felt like her intimidation worked well enough to such that Kris will not say anything. It is in this moment that Susie explains her terms to Kris. They will get more chalk from the supply closet, and when they return to class, Kris will silently begin to work on their project alone. She asks if they agree, which prompts a dialogue box to appear. Before the player can answer, the box is ripped away from the screen as Susie doesn't care what Kris has to say. She continues her point, stating that your choices don't matter, inadvertently echoing the sentiment from the Garner Maker sequence. With this action, it would seem that Susie has the ability to prompt a dialogue response from the player, while simultaneously being able to take it away. Susie unwittingly gave us a choice to control Kris's response within the narrative, thus exercising our control over it. With the added detail of our choice no longer bearing weight, we can't help but wonder how Susie was able to do this, but we'll get to that later. They arrive at the supply closet and something feels off. No, not that kind of off. The room fills with darkness, removing any light that was previously filling the room. Despite her earlier confident and aggressive demeanor, it would seem that Susie is shaken by these events. When prompted, Kris backs away, which leads to Susie and Kris entering the room together. The area in which the supply closet previously inhabited is now gone. We can tell that this room is more akin to a hallway now. Loose papers are splayed about on the floor, and the hallway abruptly ends in darkness. Susie cannot seem to find a light switch, and just when they decide to give up, the door slams shut, locking them both inside, an event which has not been explained to this day. The floor gives out, and our main characters fall into a life-changing adventure. We hear a faint sound of waves crashing along a shore, and then we wake up to find Kris has been transformed. They are now outfitted with a garb that is more akin to a knight in shining armor. Moving forward, we appear to have landed in this area that is empty, devoid of color and life. The stone platform from which we now stand appears to be floating above pure darkness. Above us, we see these things that share a likeness to punching bags people would use to practice boxing. They react to Kris's presence, some even becoming violent as they walk by. Every so often, we notice this shadowy figure lurking in the background, using darkness to move around in secret, as well as these piles of dust that seem to work as great hiding spots. Susie is found hiding in one of them and has been equally transformed by this world of darkness. She berates Kris, somehow evaluating that the current predicament is their fault, ordering them to lead the way, only to then take back control a moment later, leaving them behind. Susie notices that same shadowy figure standing atop a massive perch. Susie and Kris are then ambushed, forced to flee for their lives. After escaping their attacker, they find themselves at the remnant of an old castle town. There are spaces for shops and houses for living, however, they all look very generic, almost like they are spaces waiting to be filled. Placeholder buildings, if you will. Inside the main courtyard, the two teenagers are met with a voice, one which advocates for calm and cooperation. He addresses Kris and Susie by name and requests that they listen to his tale. These two have found their way here, as was foretold by an ancient prophecy. This is the Dark World, an echelon of reality that lies below the Light World, which Kris and Susie both originate from. Before, Darkners and Lightners lived in perfect unity as long as there was balance. If the balance was upset, then a calamity would occur, enveloping the land in devastation, as if there are too many dark fountains, then the world would be destroyed. If three heroes emerge, they will banish this thing called the Angel's Heaven and save the world. The heroes from the prophecy are described as a human, a monster, and a prince from the dark. This ambiguity would normally prompt follow-up questions, however, Susie could not be any less interested in answering the call. Before there is time to elaborate, we are ambushed once again, this time directly. This is Lancer, a Darkner who was also featured in the prophecy cutscene. He appears to be aware of the prophecy, seeing himself as the perfect foil for the Lightners, proclaiming himself to be the bad guy. He attacks our heroes a second time. After his bike runs out of fuel, Lancer retreats, and the hooded figure can now properly introduce himself. This is Ralsei, the prince of this kingdom and the prince mentioned within the prophecy. He has waited here patiently, ready to welcome the two Lightners on their journey to seal the fountains. Ralsei has explained the circumstances of their situation, the stakes of failure, and the importance of Susie's involvement. However, she disregards all of it and turns to leave. Ralsei tries to stop her, advocating for the world which Susie inhabits herself, which proves ineffective. Susie has been shown to have a distinct understanding of how the world views her, and believes herself to be justified in her own understanding that the fate of the world is none of her business. She would let the world burn as it has allowed her to burn. Susie leaves, and Ralsei turns to Kris to lead the way, giving them control, despite supposedly being more knowledgeable about their current situation. After a relatively deep combat tutorial, which is incredibly annoying to get footage for, we walk through what Ralsei calls the Great Door and find ourselves inside the Field of Hopes and Dreams. As we traverse this field, we find several Darkners, some of which have already been defeated. This moment would mark the third time Susie has been attacked since she entered the Dark World, so as a result, she has taken to lashing out at any and every Darkner that gets in her way. As she made her way through the field herself, she ate a large portion of a cake that didn't belong to her, pummeled certain enemies until they were off the beaten path, and proceeded to bypass a puzzle which involves a row of spikes. This development has thrown Ralsei into a panic. He is of the firm belief that as the heroes from the prophecy, you should try and resolve all conflicts without violence, regardless of the intentions of the attacker. Lancer has been given strict orders to destroy the Lightners before they reach the Dark Fountain of Card Castle. Lancer is supported by an assortment of Darkner subordinates left under his command via Lancer's father, the Spade King. The enemies we fight make it very clear that they are paid and are not fans of their jobs. making it almost comedically easy to convince them to stop fighting. In time, we find Susie stagnant behind a locked door. A large crack is present beside the door to imply that she has attempted to break into the next room by force several times. Ralsei explains that to progress, sometimes all three heroes will be needed. With this, we see our first glimpse of Ralsei holding knowledge of future events, a detail that will go unnoticed by Susie for some time. Fanfare. The Deltarune squad has been formed, although I do not think this fellowship will last very long. A short, adorable, checkered piece is now blocking our way. As the flavor text reads, it is trying its best to defeat you, but it's not doing a very good job. We have a few options on how we can end this battle, however Susie chooses aggression no matter what. Susie continues to argue that this Darkner attacked them, so whatever happens here is out of her hands. The battle is not resolved peacefully, and Ralsei sees this as an opportunity to offer his input. He displays his ignorance in the conversation following the fight. Despite Susie's refusal earlier, Ralsei once again affirms that Susie is a hero with the ability to create a more peaceful future. Fighting is not what Ralsei thinks they should be doing, so in a roundabout way, he is ordering Susie to stop attacking people. Following Susie's silence, Ralsei attempts to bargain, asking that she attack with less ferocity. If an enemy is weakened, he can simply use his pacify spell to subdue them, a compromise which Susie ignores. The group happens across Lancer once more, reinvigorated with the new group of underlings to help him fulfill his father's wishes. An attempt is made to intimidate the party, as Lancer is confident that he can even beat Susie now. The notion that even the purple girl cannot stop him is where Susie draws the line. His attempt to appear intimidating has upset Susie on a personal level, so she seeks to do a better job. She returns to her previously observed demeanor with glaring eyes and razor-sharp teeth. The threat of masticating Lancer's face is made, echoing the threat she made to Kris at the beginning of the story. However, the threat seems to have fallen on deaf ears, or rather, no ears at all, as Lancer is under the impression that Susie was offering a demonstration rather than a threat of bodily harm. Confused, Susie is too befuddled to correct him, as he proceeds to order his subordinates to attack. The confusion continues as Lancer proceeds to update his playbook. Instead of crying out as an infantile St. Nicholas, he has upgraded to threatening to smash the Lightners into blood. I am absolutely certain that the mentioning of blood will not spark any debates within the community in the future. Oh, and look, he even brought a bucket to put the blood in. He's really taking this bad guy thing seriously. Lancer is so eager to improve, he looks to Susie for some notes about his performance. A request that makes Susie even more lost, to the point of exasperation. It is not until Lancer reveals his desire to imitate Susie that she begins to soften. This action, impersonation based on idolization, has touched Susie. She is equally surprised as she is joyed that somebody is not only appreciative of her existence, but seeks to emulate it. The moment is fleeting, but it does seem to have had an impact on Susie. A question is raised regarding the official name of the heroes. For consistency's sake, and to appease the YouTube monetization overlords, I will be referring to our protagonists as the Fun Gang. After the Fun Gang has decided upon a label, the adorable Darkner from earlier makes a return. A crown lands atop its head, giving it increased strength, size, agility, and legs. A strategy quickly presents itself to trick it into removing the crown by getting it to bow, a plan which Susie refuses to agree with. This Darkner cannot be warned of Susie's attacks, allowing her to inflict pain unimpeded. As the fight goes on, the K-Round summons a carton of almond milk to heal itself, while boosting its attack power. Despite this knowledge, Susie continues to attack, refusing to let the K-Round think she is afraid of it. The disagreement from earlier between Ralsei and Susie makes a return, or more accurately, it never truly subsided. Susie was attacking the Darkner, which in turn made it more likely to fight back, while making it a stronger foe. Ralsei explains as such. However, Susie is repulsed by his argument. She retorts, claiming her role was vital for the group's success. The K-Round was on the attack, so Susie was doing a good thing by hurting it. A disagreement with no clear-cut moral high ground. Susie has had enough of Ralsei's judgment, and would instead prefer the positive reinforcement from Lancer. If she is not good at being a good guy, she will be part of the bad guys instead. The Dark Fun Gang is born, and Ralsei cannot help but feel responsible. We now enter Scarlet Forest with Ralsei at our side. As we explore, we continue to cross paths with the Dark Fun Gang. Despite their self-proclaimed goal to thrash the Lightners and be evil, they don't seem to do much thrashing. They seem to be more interested in posing, lounging, and selling treats at a bake sale. The many antics of the Dark Fun Gang culminate in a faux battle with a thrash machine that they tricked us into building for them. Before the fight begins, Susie once again gives you the illusion of choice. Despite Ralsei's previous treatment, she seems to want Ralsei and Kris to join their side. If her and Lancer win, then they will join the Dark Fun Gang. She asks if these circumstances are okay, only to then rip your choice away moments later. I feel like this is alluding to something, I just can't put my finger on it yet. Susie and Lancer rejoin the Fun Gang and the four continue to make their way to Card Castle. As they travel, they converse on feelings of friendship and belonging. Susie and Lancer find a dark candy which she allows Lancer to keep, despite being hungry herself. As they get closer to their goal, the dark fountain is spotted. Lancer is curious as to what will happen when they finally reach the castle, and Susie bluntly foreshadows a violent outcome. Lancer was given the job to stop the Lightners by any means necessary, yet here he is walking and sharing candy while feeling a sense of belonging while he's with them. Lancer has a pretty good idea at this point who Susie is, and he definitely understands who his father is. He knows what is about to happen. No one will win if Susie and the Spade King meet at present moment. Lancer understands this, and it scares him, so he must act. In a moment of indistinct intention, Lancer announces that he is about to leave. When Susie asks when he'll be back, he replies, never. Having recently grown attached to Lancer, Susie is completely shocked by his departure. She gives chase, prompting Ralsei to follow and Kris just after. Lancer enters the castle walls, however, almost as expected, the card castle is heavily defended. The Fun Gang is knocked unconscious, to then later awaken in a state of incarceration. Confused, the three of them begin to communicate, seeking an exit to their current predicament. Susie is stopped by a puzzle, almost as if that cell was chosen for her due to her lack of experience with puzzles. After a little help, Susie is free to move on, leaving Ralsei and Kris outside of vocal range. In a strange turn of events, Ralsei asks Kris if they are worried about Susie, before giving them equally peculiar instructions. He tells Kris to close their eyes and focus on Susie. When we comply, our perspective shifts, and now we can see what Susie sees. This is not a flash forward or back. This is a narrative perspective change happening in real time. It would seem that there is a systemic connection between Kris and Susie, or at least Susie, Kris, and the player. Susie explores the dungeon alone. When arriving at a crossroads, we have the ability to give her directions. Ultimately, her attention is occupied by the faint sound of Lancer giving orders to one of his subordinates. Lancer is firm in his command that the Lightners are to be kept here, and under no circumstances is the purple girl allowed to leave. Susie brushes this off as she pleads with Lancer to help her free the rest of the Fun Gang. He refuses, but before he gets the chance to explain why, Susie is sent down a downward spiral of self-doubt and bitterness. She knew it was too good to be true. A friend, a companion who tolerated her existence, and even wished to be a part of it. This was all a dream, sadly. Lancer does attempt to quell Susie's anger, but it's too late. Susie is angry, and she feels more alone than she ever has. The battle between them begins. As they fight, Lancer and Susie trade blows. Susie's carrying more of a ferocious weight, a weight which only increases in damage, making Lancer's health drop more and more sharply with each attack. Eventually, Lancer begins to stop fighting back. With this knowledge, Susie's expression briefly changes, but then she becomes noticeably more angry. He is showing mercy, refusing to attack his friend. Her resolve is seemingly not shaken as she becomes even angrier, apathetic to Lancer's self-destructive decision to oppose Susie. If he wants his life to come to an end so badly, then Susie is happy to oblige. The screen cuts to black, and when light returns, Lancer is still alive. Susie missed. Intentionally, she missed Lancer. She drops to her knees. No anger can be seen in her face anymore, only lament. This brief hesitation allows Lancer to explain his reasoning. The singular reason why he had the Lightners imprisoned was for their protection, as well as that of Lancer's father. He doesn't even think to weigh the likelihood of who will win or lose. He sees the situation as a negative no matter what. Susie turns away from him as he explains this, and I can only imagine the look of fear on her face, followed by the look of relief that followed it. She quickly hatches a plan. If Lancer doesn't want herself and the Spade King to fight, they simply won't. She agrees to not fight the Spade King, for Lancer's sake. Lancer agrees with this plan and then leaves, while Susie returns for Ralsei and Kris. This moment has proven influential for Susie, as in one fell swoop, she now has decided to go back on her modus operandi. She came face to face with who she was, and what she needed to do to continue being that person. Knowing all of this, she decided to figuratively and literally turn back. She has undergone a change in nature. During the elevator ride back up to the surface, Susie begins to ask for help in the best way she can. Naturally, she attempts to maintain her abrasive persona, but her options are null. Susie has no idea how to resolve conflict peacefully, but Ralsei and Kris do. So she will trust them to show her the way. Ralsei leaves, and before Kris can follow, Susie stops them to converse in private. This entire time, Susie was under the impression that Kris had it out for her. Kris had knowledge that could ruin Susie's life, and she thought the only thing stopping that from happening was her intimidation from a few hours ago. She now understands that if they want to leave, all of them will have to get along for the first time. Susie will trust Kris, listening to their commands from now on. A short tune plays, signifying that Susie is now a part of the group, for real this time. After a few shenanigans with Rule's card, the fun gang finds themselves atop Card Castle. The Spade King has lied in wait, eagerly expecting an update from his son. He becomes mostly displeased to know that not only are the Lightners not dead, but are also here in his vicinity. He attempts to correct his son, and we get a chance to hear the King's perspective firsthand. The Lightners are scum and not to be trusted. They deceived Lancer with sentimentality and false promises. When Lancer disagrees, the King becomes enraged, prompting Susie to step in. Anticipating her feelings towards Lancer, the Spade King uses him as a hostage. Despite his protest, the fun gang surrenders. Just before the King can win, Lancer revolts against his father, fleeing the scene. The battle is about to begin, and we see a callback to when Lancer was first introduced. Interesting. Lancer called himself the bad guy, and now the King also calls himself the bad guy. I wonder if there's some kind of lesson to be learned here. As the King fights, he speaks of this night, the night which has called forth the fountain and has allowed this land to form. The King worships the Dark Fountain, and is already aware that the Lightners will try to remove it. This is, from his perspective, a matter of survival. He continues speaking on the inevitable revenge to be carried out against the light. He seeks to stop history from repeating itself. From his perspective, the Lightners had used and disposed of the Darkners in the past, and now they seek to take away the Darkners home. The King sees this as both a way to get revenge against the Lightners, and to save his people from certain destruction. From the King's perspective, he is doing what is right, which is very peculiar as he sees himself as the bad guy. The King is now defeated, either as a result of his overexertion or getting absolutely thrashed. The King begins to change his tune, shifting more towards cooperation. Susie is understandably distrusting, while Ralsei seeks to heal the King immediately, much to the party's misfortune. The group has been seriously injured, and in a heroic display of courage, Kris jumps forward to defend Susie from the King's attack. The King is not fazed by this. The King grabs Kris, reveling in the impending victory of the Dark. But just before this victory, Susie returns the favor. She proclaims Kris to be her friend, and she stands at the ready to defend them. Depending on how you treated the Darkners of this world and how you let Susie treat them, one of two events will happen. If you allowed even a single enemy to flee from violence, then Ralsei will cast Pacify on the King. Lancer has barred the door, allowing the fun gang to make their escape. If you were vigilant against Susie's aggression, and treated everyone with kindness, then the Darkners will all rally to your aid, saving Kris and Susie from the King. Now Lancer is the dad. This change is rather significant as you now have the chance to say goodbye to everyone. Right before you move on to the fountain, Ralsei stops you. He takes the time to say how wonderful it was to meet both of you, while covering his face with his hat. After Susie's protest, he removes his hat altogether, which reveals our fluffy prince to look eerily similar to a member of the Dreemurr family. If you played Undertale, then you might be forgiven for confusing Ralsei for Kris's older brother, Azrael. After all is said and done, the two Lightners finally find themselves face to face with the Dark Fountain, their goal. And now, it's time to seal it away. Susie has a brief monologue about the crazy experience they just shared together. She is beside herself, unsure of the real stakes of this conflict while excited at the chance to be a part of something so interesting. However, none of that matters now, as it's time to go home. Kris walks forward, and almost out of instinct, the red soul is sent into the fountain, sealing it shut, potentially forever. The room is dark, but luckily Susie has finally found a light switch. The two students are now inside the old classroom, having taken a wrong turn while inside the school supply closet from earlier. Susie looks around, in absolute confusion, as if something is now missing. She continues from her previous thought. They cannot find the chalk, so they will go back to class. If she needs it so bad, Miss Alphys can just go get the chalk by herself. Walking outside, we can clearly see a few hours have passed. I guess time flies when you're playing pretend. Susie pauses in front of the supply closet with Kris at her side. Was it real? Was any of what just happened real? Susie begins to leave, but before she does, she puts her hand on Kris's shoulder once again. Let's go back there tomorrow, alright? She then leaves with a smile on her face. There are several interactions you can have throughout the town. Snowy and Monster Kid are waiting outside this apartment building slandering Susie. Noelle can be seen spending time with her father in the hospital. The mayor is very busy, although I do wonder why a teenager would want to speak to the mayor anyway. Kris's father is in fact alive. He simply lives inside his flower shop. When Kris arrives home, their mother is there to greet them, proud over the news that they made a new friend. A freshly made pie is waiting on the stove, and everything is okay. Kris has had an eventful day. The school bully who threatened to murder them is now their friend. They are a part of this long-awaited prophecy, and there is a magical world inside their school supply closet. At least it seems that way. For all they know, none of it was even real. But none of that matters now, as it is time for Kris to slink in their bed and fall fast asleep. Now they can let all of the troubles of the world float away as they rest. Good night, Kris. Or, I guess not. It seems as though Kris Dreemurr has other plans, so they're going solo for a while, leaving us to wait inside the not-so-empty bird cage. They produce a knife. What they plan to do with that knife is anyone's guess. And then they turn around and look directly at us. We are their prisoner. No one can choose who they are in this world. Our choices don't matter. There we go. Finally, we can now get into the meat and potatoes of this video. If you jumped right to this section because you wanted to skip the story recap, welcome. And now we can begin the actual analysis. Kris Dreemurr is a tough character to pin down, as most if not all of our understanding of them is gained through subtext. Despite how close we are physically, Kris doesn't want to talk to us, and they don't even acknowledge us until the end of the chapter. Also, considering how rarely they speak, we are left to find an understanding through other avenues. The living space of a person can tell you almost everything you need to know about them. The Dreemurr's house is impressive, with plenty of space to accommodate a family. Despite this, we see that Kris lives with their mother, while their father is living alone, potentially facing homelessness. Their living situation gives us an incredible amount of context when discerning the current thoughts, motivations, and mental state of our dear protagonist. From the beginning, we can see hints of Kris's feelings of inadequacy. Their brother has all these personal belongings and trophies, while they have almost nothing. It is worth noting that there is a theory floating around the community that Kris has taken all of their belongings and hidden them away from the player's eyes, which is a pretty interesting idea. Until more evidence of this theory presents itself, I think the initial interpretation fits best. No desire to keep personal belongings means that Kris has no desire or sentimental attachment to physical objects. Or, at the very least, they value material possessions less than other people would. We can glean this from their clothing as well, as they exclusively wear hand-me-downs from their older brother, Azrael. The narrative choice of making Kris not materialistic raises a few eyebrows, when you take into account the nature of the Dark Worlds. Objects that are transformed within the Dark Worlds have a vague understanding of the outside world, and that understanding can span a large amount of time. Any objects that Kris held dear would have been transformed and seen in Chapter 3's Dark World. Funnily enough, this would support the idea of Kris removing all of their belongings from their room, and this could potentially also support the idea that Kris was already familiar with the Dark Worlds before the story even began. This behavior wasn't something that they learned from their family. The Dreemurrs seem to be very sentimental. If Azrael was to be used as an example, it's clear that old memories and achievements are noted and valued by the family, and despite this, they are not used as a means to quantify affection. There is a sense of contrast in the Dreemurrs' rooms. Azrael with all his achievements, and Kris with their singular birdcage. The birdcage is the only thing that Kris owns, and it has a specific and defined purpose. The presence of this birdcage from the beginning implies that despite this being when we enter the world, Kris anticipated our arrival, or even Chapter 1 is not when we first get here. We have very little context of the main character's actions, but there are consequences being displayed for actions we did not commit. The cage is there to stop us from running away. Kris anticipates this, most likely because we have done so in the past, which naturally makes this all very confusing considering this is the beginning of the story, right? Still holding out for that Chapter 0, Toby. The specifics of the Dreemurr divorce are intentionally withheld, and I'm starting to think we will never get the full details. For now, we're going with the mostly understood assumption that Kris was adopted at a point in their life where they were very young. At the point of Kris's adoption, Toriel and Asgore were happily married. Due to a catastrophic event which led to December Holiday going missing, Toriel decided she could not be with Asgore anymore and has chosen to divorce him. It should be noted that the Dreemurrs did take necessary precautions to at least try to understand Kris as best they could. The book in the library is one notable example of Toriel trying to make a reasonable effort to raise Kris, despite her limited understanding of humans. It should also be noted that this was only semi-successful, and should be definitely noted that humans are so uncommon in Hometown that Toriel had to resort to reading a book rather than asking one directly. It would seem that Kris exhibits behavior that we as the audience understand as strange, but Toriel has passed off as normal human behavior. She is clearly not aware of the soul's presence, and she is not concerned over Kris disappearing for long periods of time. Current develops within Deltarune's narrative would prove that Kris has been a part of a greater plot that has been in motion since long before Chapter 1. With the current context of Chapter 4, I can say with certainty Kris knows what the Dark Worlds are, or at the very least understood them to an extent. When the supply closet door opens, Kris backs away, almost in fear. When considering all of the secondhand information we receive from Hometown's residents, we get the idea that Kris is no stranger to exploring seemingly dangerous locations. If this was Kris's first exposure to the Dark Worlds, then I feel like they would be more interested in exploring it, yet they back away. This is also supported by Kris's collaboration with Carol Holiday. If Kris was completely ignorant to the Dark Worlds, they would have learned this information, explained the information to the mayor, get her to believe this information, and then this would have led her to formulate a plan regarding whatever it is they're trying to do. I find it way more believable that the opening of the Dark Worlds is a direct part of Carol Holiday's plan, which still makes me scratch my head as to why Kris decided to back away. This leads to the big question that has been floating around recently. Was Noelle actually the person who was supposed to go with Kris? A fair question, as with current circumstances it would seem like the prophecy features two separate girls, the assumption being that Susie is the other girl while Noelle is the true second hero. Full disclosure, I am biased towards my own understanding of Chapter 4. My personal understanding is that Susie is the true second hero, and the other girl that we see is this Neo version of Susie, a completely new version of Susie that is born from monster and human fusion. But back to Noelle. The overall context of this scene is very important. Noelle is the one who initially offers to go with Susie. Noelle is almost completely confirmed that she doesn't know anything about what Carol is planning, as she is okay with Kris and Susie snooping around the Holiday Mansion in Chapter 4. If Noelle was even remotely involved, she would push for Kris and her to go to the supply closet instead. Also, if I was Carol and I wanted Kris and Noelle to go together, I would make sure to tell Alphys. If Alphys was even remotely in on the plan, then she would have made sure to send Kris and Noelle. So no, I am not a believer in the theory that Kris and Noelle were initially supposed to go together. Back to the question of Kris backing away. Going off the interpretation of Kris knowing of the Dark Worlds already, then I honestly believe Kris is having second thoughts. If Kris knows the dangers that await in the Dark Worlds, then they know what might happen should they fail. Like I mentioned, I believe Kris and Carol are already on the up and up about the Dark Worlds before Chapter 1, so this development means that there is already a plan put into place with Kris and Susie in mind. Kris may be having second thoughts because they know what might happen later will put Susie in danger, which leads us to our next Kris moment. Jumping in front of Susie to save her. Susie's actions towards Kris have been malicious and violent to say the least, and knowing this, you would naturally expect Kris to dislike Susie. Kris is still a dreamer. Despite not being very emotive, Kris understands how to be caring and compassionate. I don't think Kris would have allowed Susie to be attacked even if they didn't like her. When I think about it, it just feels a little petty. Like, this person bullied me, so now I'm just gonna let them die? This is an action Kris would have done so despite Susie's treatment because, Kris is reasonable. They are a good person at their core. Would really enforce the idea that Kris identifies with Susie on a more personal level is all of the other hints which appear later. This gives us a clear understanding of who Kris is. You can pull their hair, you can tell them that their mother will abandon them, pin them against a locker, or threaten to bite their face off. They will still help you, if you need it. Finally, the ending of Chapter 1 is where we see Kris's most impactful and possibly the most pertinent action regarding who they are. This scene is really made to be a reveal. Kris is their own person, a separate entity from the player with their own desires, keeping us hostage for reasons that still escape us. Perhaps we are kept around for the sake of Kris's survival, or even the sheer utility of sealing the Dark Worlds. There are so many possibilities that I would rather stick with what this means within the narrative. This realization gives us a new perspective on how the story will be told. We are not Kris, we are ourselves. We inhabit Kris's body with a limited amount of agency. If we are being realistic, we are a sort of prisoner here in the world of Deltarune. I think the power dynamic between Kris and the player has become more and more clear as the game continues. Kris needs us for a specific purpose, and they are not intending to ask nicely for our cooperation. The narrative implications of this mean that we are subject to the story, and we have no control how the story is carried out, fully echoing the sentiment from the Garner Maker sequence. No one can choose who they are in this world. We cannot change our fate, and this is what will happen. Funnily enough, it would seem that we connect with Kris on this level, as the subtext of Azrael's shadow is very real. Whenever talking to the many residents of Hometown, there is a good chance that they bring up Azrael, and I can only imagine how this is getting more and more annoying for Kris. Kris is not their brother, in more ways than one, and I have a sneaking suspicion that it bothers Kris that people constantly bring up Azrael. With the mentioning of the red horns Kris would wear, I would wager the shadow of Azrael's accomplishments and status make it difficult for Kris to stand out on their own. A lot of Kris's cited behavior has been more on the destructive side. Scaring Noelle, climbing up things they shouldn't, singing swears in the town choir. All of these things fall out of the traditionalist vibe of Hometown. And I'm going to take a wild guess and assume that Kris was doing it for attention. There is this drive to differentiate yourself from other people, prove that you are unique, prove that you matter. With such an accomplished sibling, I would wager that this is the source of their choices. They have made it a point to differentiate themselves from Azrael as much as possible, as to make themselves feel unique. Like they have their own identity aside from just Azrael's sibling. This doesn't even have to be a conscientious thing. They may be doing this subconsciously. Despite the appearance of your typical silent protagonist, Kris is very opinionated, and they have a tremendous role to play in this story. They are also simply one side of the Deltarune coin. The introduction of our second protagonist is intentionally blunt. She disrupts who is currently speaking, the music stops to accommodate her, everything about her entrance can tell you that Susie is not a graceful character. She isn't the most popular either, as she has garnered a negative opinion from all of her class residents. To understand Susie and why she does what she does, we need to discuss fear. the unpleasant emotional response from perceived threats. Susie is the new girl. Even without the added context of Chapter 3, we can assume she does not have a long history in this town. This adds a lack of understanding between her and most people she interacts with, and vice versa. Fear of the unknown is a common occurrence in most media. Without a proper level of understanding, many people take to filling the gaps of knowledge with whatever they can, and rarely is it accurate. As we learn more and more about Susie, we can tell that she is under the impression that most people do not like her, and while sure, her street cred is lacking, this is mostly a result of assumptions. Susie never actually attacked anyone, but she understood that there was a level of fear from those around her. So, as a result, she played into it for the sake of self-preservation. We can tell from Susie's design that she is not too focused on her physical appearance. Her eyes are covered by her long, rugged hair, her pants are ripped, and her shoes look a bit awkward. I never noticed this before, but her shoes in the light world look strange, almost like they don't fit her correctly. But the boots that she has in the dark world fit her just fine. She may not be fitted with the latest fashion trends, and what she does wear seems to be old and worn down. People have already deduced that this is because she's poor, or the people who are supposed to take care of her do not do a very good job, if such people exist. Susie has almost nothing, and suddenly it becomes more clear why she is so jealous of Kris. Whether they are happy about their life circumstances or not, they have quite a lot more than Susie does. I should mention, before we actually see Susie's living situation, all of this still falls under the lens of speculation. During her episodes of intimidation, she often refers to Kris's mother, a loving and responsible parental figure. Most of the time. In Susie's eyes, Kris has everything she ever wanted. A big house, a loving family, hair that smells like apples. This is more than likely her motive for how she treats Kris. Based on her own insecurities, she targeted Kris especially after receiving no reaction. She has a clear understanding of how people perceive her, and most of these assumptions were proven correct when she decided to play into them. It's not clear when Susie began to use the fear of others to push them away. It could be argued that it didn't start with her, as in her behavior is a direct result of how she was treated. Susie never physically harmed anyone in class, except for Kris. Naturally, this doesn't mean Susie is completely innocent, however, it does make her more complex. The subtext formed upon learning that Susie only intimidated people adds the nuance that she never wanted to hurt anyone. She went to great lengths to push people away, make them afraid of her. The reason why Kris received her greatest effort is most likely because it did not work. This particular example technically falls outside of Chapter 1 because it canonically happens before. However, it is pertinent to the conversation, so we'll cover it. This is so strange to think about given the length of Deltarune's development cycle. However, I think there are some new people who don't know about the Spamton sweepstakes. There was a comment I received on a recent video that unironically asked if an image I used as a reference was from a fanfiction. Actually, yeah, totally. This was absolutely a piece of fanfiction that I used as evidence for my video. It was written by this awesome fanfic writer named Robert Fox. He actually made an Undertale AU back in 2018 and he's been slowly updating it ever since. So anyway, this is mostly old news, so I'll make this quick. The Spamton Sweepstakes was a charity event that released a year after Chapter 2. This event was made to raise money for a charity called Child's Play, and after reaching certain donation goals, a new entry would be released in the form of these prizes. Some of these items would have links and when clicked on would bring you to one of these pages. Most of these pages were gibberish or means to tease Chapter 3, and others were posts from Noelle's personal blog. Unfortunately, these pages have some pretty interesting information regarding our characters, but not all of this information is referenced in the full game. Information that a lot of people may have forgotten or never learned in the first place because they are new. For example, Raise Up Your Bat was not a song written by December Holiday. It was a song made for the Blood Crushers franchise, an in-universe movie series that was also referenced in Chapter 2. For some reason, people have come up with the idea that December wrote the song herself, and no, that is not the case. As referenced by Tenna in Chapter 3, she would change the channel on the TV to a station that was playing that song, but she did not write the song herself. The reason why I bring any of this up is because there is a post which details a confrontation between Kris and Susie before Chapter 1. I'm not going to recap this post. If you know about the Spamton Sweepstakes, you've heard the story already, and if you haven't, then you should probably go read the whole thing yourself. This event is actually very similar to Susie's introduction, the only difference being Kris is a little bit more responsive. potentially because the player is not there. For now, I'm going to assume that the player had no influence whatsoever. Susie is obviously trying to intimidate Kris, either because it's just how she operates or because she genuinely wants Kris to stop smelling like apples. Susie was cited several times in Chapter 1 to be hungry, so it could be easily assumed that any reminder of food would make her upset. She threatens to bite into Kris's face, like an apple, something she comes very close to doing at the beginning of Chapter 1. All of these threats are more amusing to Kris than frightening. This informs us of Kris's general personality and how similar it is to Susie's. Despite all her efforts, it never seemed that Kris ever held a grudge. In fact, just the opposite. This misunderstanding most likely comes from Susie's preconceived notions regarding how other people feel about her. She thinks Kris is laughing at her, when instead, Kris is laughing at what she said. I'd say it's pretty safe to assume Kris thinks that Susie is awesome, sharing in a lot of her interests. Rock music, blood, playing pranks, all things that I would also say that Susie likes. Knowing more about the characters in current day, I'd say their friendship just makes sense. In the past, I probably would have said that they connect with each other because they don't connect with anyone else. Kris and Susie are not the most popular in class, and while Susie has a reason, it seemed like they would share in this loneliness. This facet of the narrative continues throughout Chapter 1, with the eating of the chalk to the disagreement with Susie and Ralsei. Susie acts as the foil throughout most of the chapter, mostly because of how she believes she is being perceived. Remember, throughout most of Chapter 1, Susie is under the impression that Kris doesn't like her and is silently judging her behind that blank expression. The entire narrative of Susie in Chapter 1 is a subversion to the understood operation of an RPG, that of which being that all members of the party are at your command at all times. It's a very interesting story beat that I rarely see, an RPG where a member of your party ignores you. Within the world of RPG games, characters can have disagreements or failures in communication. However, when the time comes to enter a battle, they still do everything you say. There is a good reason for this. Obviously, playing a game to then have the game not listen to you can be very annoying. An interesting and immersive detail, but it can still ruin your fun, so I don't think we'll be seeing this mechanic again in the future. This depth to Susie, the fact that she can tell you no, puts her as one of the most interesting RPG characters to ever exist. It also builds up how strong Susie is, and how strong she will inevitably become. Having this ability gives her a level of agency over the story, equal to or even greater than the player. This is a video game. We are the player. We spent $25 on this game, so it should do what we say. Right? Wrong, dumbass. Susie doesn't have to listen to you. The only reason she hasn't taken control completely is because she simply lacks the desire to. She totally could, by the way. There's a very good reason why people feel like Susie is the true protagonist of Deltarune. Susie possesses pre-established insecurities, which only get worse the more and more time she spends with Ralsei. He has a very clear idea of how the heroes of legend should act, and as Susie does not fit that mold, he sees fit to ask her to do what he says. This naturally only feeds into Susie's self-doubts. Before she had an idea of what people around her saw her as, and with the constant voice of Ralsei telling her that what she's doing is wrong, she just can't help but act negatively. Joining Lancer only made sense for her. On the bad guy side, she was praised, her input was valued, and it just seems easier. Remember, at this point in the story, Susie was already attacked 3 times, so with joining Lancer, those attacks will stop happening. Sounds like a pretty good deal from her perspective. No more judgmental Ralsei or Kris making her feel bad. All she had to do was just chill with Lancer. Speaking of, Lancer was exactly what Susie needed. A voice of confidence and praise. It may seem shallow on paper, but people who suffer from self-esteem issues may just need a little compliment every now and then. It's not necessarily Ralsei's fault, it's just his inexperience that he's showing here. I think the biggest indicator of who Susie really is lies in her fight with Lancer. This entire time, she's hurt. She feels betrayed. The pessimistic voice in her head is telling her she's bad and she'll never make friends. All of her old ways come back in full force, just to push Lancer away, which makes it all the more impressive that Lancer stood his ground. This was a very dangerous gambit, and if I'm being honest, I doubt Lancer was trying to call Susie's bluff. He was ready and willing to let Susie kill him to keep her safe. Such trust, such selflessness can move mountains. This kindness was not lost to Susie, as she yields. And of course, based on her reaction after learning the truth, we know that Susie didn't really want to fight Lancer either. Being put into this unforeseen situation, she now has to rely on other people. The conversation which follows in the elevator is endearing, as Susie now trusts you enough to listen. However, many people don't actually realize that there is something else here that is still unresolved. Susie is treating this conversation as a temporary truce between her and Kris, claiming that if they want to get out of here, they'll have to get along. Kris was never aggressive towards Susie, and they would likely love the notion of spending more time with her. Yet, as I mentioned, Susie doesn't realize this yet. This is Susie momentarily accepting that Kris knows better than her when it comes to peacefully resolving conflict. It's not until Kris straight up throws themselves in front of King's attack that Susie has yet another epiphany. At the climax of Chapter 1, Susie undergoes 2 life-changing realizations. These events have stuck with Susie, and the residual effects can be seen in the next chapter and beyond. Susie has undergone a change in nature. The mode of operation which she has clung to for the better part of her life is not applicable to her current situation. This is what makes people so endeared to Susie. She changes, becomes a better person, moving past her impulsive and abrasive attitude while maintaining her personality at its core. People care for her. People will sacrifice for her. She is not alone. And now that she has received that taste of friendship, I doubt that there is anything that will stop her from protecting it. Susie is awesome. Ralsei is our guide and acts as both the call to adventure as well as the inciting incident. This narrative cheat code is the self-proclaimed Prince of Darkness, who has little to no subjects. If there is one thing that all Deltarune fans can agree on, it's that Ralsei is one of the most suspicious goat boys to ever grace our screen. Everything about him is cloaked in mystery, from his origins to his literal appearance. Even after knowing so much more about him, it's hard to say if there is a legitimate reason why he was so secretive, or if the superfluous reason he gives is the truth. The reason given for why he hid his face is because he felt self-conscious about how he looks. This is a facet of his character we should probably wait until Chapter 2 to talk about, because for the majority of Chapter 1 he is purely Darkness Ralsei. Ralsei's existence is shrouded in questions, and unfortunately, none of these questions are asked by the characters. Susie doesn't think to question because of her own reluctance to join in the prophecy, and Kris may very well know the answers to all of these questions already. Deception and guile are typically used to describe someone who is nefarious, and most likely to turn their back on you. It is absolutely fair to not trust Ralsei in the circumstances which he presents. His happy, cute, and accepting personality would make the perfect smokescreen if he was intending on portraying our Lightners. However, I have never found myself in the camp of Ralsei is evil. Not necessarily because I see him as innocent. Trust me, he has many flaws. The reason why is because I believe he's just ignorant when it comes to things like relationships or social interaction. He is outgoing and charming, yet we can see clearly that he doesn't take the thoughts of others into account. Not fully, at least. Again, not because he's evil, he just doesn't know any better. Ralsei understands his entire existence as the possession of a certain responsibility. He is the prince, a hero from the prophecy, and his job is to bring peace to this world. A noble motivation as any, yet in his zealous drive to work within the confines of the prophecy, he expects others to do the same. You can tell by how shocked he was that he never even considered the idea that the Lightners would say no. In his mind, this prophecy was super duper special and anyone would jump at the chance to be a part of it. Susie's initial rejection has naturally left him stunned. Even after explaining the long-term problems with letting the world fall to darkness, she doesn't budge. This is Ralsei's singular goal and his life's purpose, so he won't give up that easy. And I will say his method of persuasion is very flawed, based purely on what Ralsei says. It would seem that he's attempting to get Susie to do what he says. The way he frames everything is that this is what is expected of her, so she should just do it. Ralsei does not realize that that is not how that works. Proclaiming someone to be a hero does not give you the ability to dictate how they act. Ralsei's intentions overall are good. He is advocating for pacifism. It's an aspect of Ralsei that makes him so likable. The point of contention which he may not realize is that Susie has been attacked, and she isn't willing to turn the other cheek as quickly as him. I should make a point to highlight that what Ralsei is asking of Susie is not completely unreasonable. He even tries to compromise with using his pacify spell. Cycling back to Ralsei's inexperience, in his own words, he waited alone in Castletown his entire life for Susie and Kris to get there. While I don't think that was a very long time, it definitely sets up his motivation for believing the prophecy while explaining why he possesses this idealistic perspective on conflict. He believes that if the group is simply kind to others, then everything will be okay. A reasonable sentiment if you were a child. But as Ralsei learns much later, there will always be those who refuse to listen to reason. There will always be a time where you just have to fight people. Undertale gave us a potential outcome in the form of the pacifist route. Being the most widely enjoyed ending to Undertale, it inspired many to learn from its events. The game doesn't specifically state that you should always be nice and spare those who try to kill you. In fact, quite the opposite. In a way, Ralsei represents the Undertale true pacifist player. His intentions are to arrive at a favorable outcome, and sometimes I wonder if that is all. Like I said, Ralsei is averse to harming people, so if he has the chance to end conflict peacefully, he will do so. Yet sometimes I wonder if he even understands the emotional and moral reasons why someone would want to be a pacifist. Ralsei's not blind to the suffering of others, more so he has an empathetic blind spot when it comes to someone like Susie. Really, the only true critique I would apply to the Goat Boy is his approach to this situation. Surely there would have had to been a better approach to getting Susie to stop hurting someone than just appeal to authority. Especially considering Susie doesn't really vibe with authority too much. It's really telling how Ralsei's response to Susie's actions informs us of how little experience he has with understanding people. His compassion is for everyone, therefore it doesn't really have a lot of thought behind it. At times, he behaves as if this conclusion of peace is something he has been told to believe rather than a conclusion he has arrived to himself. With the final confrontation of the king, he arrives at half of the conclusion which Susie completes. This is really nice to see, as it brings them closer together emotionally while highlighting their character growth. As Susie was suffering from an imposed identity, Ralsei was embracing his. As a result of interacting with each other, they end up meeting somewhere in the middle, formulating their new identities in the process. Identity is an incredibly important topic of discussion in regards to Deltarune, and such that I feel like it deserves its own section. There are several reasons why people have become so enamored with this game, and one of the most well discussed is how it speaks to those on their journey of self-discovery. This isn't unique to why we as people enjoy fiction. However, this example in particular does cater to a lesser represented group of people. Throughout the libraries of narrative works, we find stories that many can resonate with. You don't have to be a member of the LGBTQ community to appreciate Deltarune, and that is one of its best qualities. Yet it does hit a little differently if you are. It's worth noting that identity doesn't exclusively mean your gender or orientation. It encapsulates who you are and the way you choose to conduct yourself, which Deltarune also does a fantastic job of representing. Every one of our main characters comes to grip with their identity in different ways. Kris struggles to differentiate their identity in their adoptive family. Susie is pigeonholed into this aggressive bully persona, which she plays into as she feels like it's the only way she can feel in control. Ralsei at first glance does not have a unique identity, playing into the one he is given. This part of the analysis isn't about me, but since we're talking about identity and backgrounds, I feel like now is a pretty good time to briefly share mine, as sometimes I find myself relating to Kris. For the most part, I'm just a bird, but whenever I decide I'm not a bird, I am a mixed bisexual man. I actually didn't know how mixed I was until relatively recently. I was given a DNA test as a joke gift last year, and I realized I'm kinda all over the place. Scottish, Irish, German, English, West African, Central African, a little bit of Indigenous Native American, and a teeny tiny bit of Ashkenazi Jew. Learning that I come from all these different places has given me a sense of perspective derived from how ignorant of this information I was. Obviously, your genetic background doesn't determine who you are, yet it does give you a sense of understanding in regards to your past. I would imagine this passes through Kris's mind on occasion, considering there is a very good chance they did not know they were human for the first part of their life. And judging by their reaction to other human content, It appears that this is a part of their identity that they have left buried for a long time. Kris Dreemurr is a human like any other human. A bit more stoic, but still. They are perfectly normal unless you count the otherworldly being who is currently hijacking their body and doesn't even have anything to do with them. Despite being their own character, Kris rarely has the chance to share their perspective. They are mostly a silent protagonist, and with this, we are left to gauge their character traits through subtext. Being the adopted child of Toriel and Asgore, we can't help but wonder how this happened. Why is Kris the only human who lives in Hometown? This question concerns the majority of Deltarune's world building, and unfortunately, it seems we won't get the answer for some time. It's not really a topic of discussion in the Dreemurr house. The fact that Deltarune takes place over a few days doesn't really help either. It's very unlikely that Toriel is going to randomly start talking about the day she adopted Kris. There just really isn't a good time to talk about something like that. So, as far as we know, she never did. I still genuinely believe that Kris realized that they were human all on their own. There was a fundamental part of Kris's identity that was hidden from them, and as a result of this concealed information, they felt very insecure about a part of their body that was in no way, shape, or form in their control. Kris wore a pair of red horns, because they either wanted to feel like they were a monster just like their family, or they felt self-conscious over their lack of horns. Either way you interpret it, it doesn't bode well for Kris's parents. This is why there's a term called lying by omission. There was a pertinent piece of information which Kris wanted to know, which was hidden from them. Understanding this, I feel like any conversation of this topic would only arrive as a result of it being prompted. Personally, I see a scene in the future where after Toriel learns about everything that's been happening, she will eventually talk about Kris's past. I do hope we get a scene like this in the future, but it's not very likely that we'll get it. Regardless of where Kris's journey began, their sense of self is all over the place. To live as a human in a monster settlement is a wonderful allegory to represent a feeling of isolation, also felt by those who wrestle with their own identity. There is a fundamental psychological or physical difference which separates you from your family, and most people that you know. These differences have not led to the people of Hometown ostracizing Kris, yet there is a great deal of ambiguity between Kris and their family. Truly, the exact triangulation of Kris's feelings towards their own understanding of self is difficult. We don't know how Kris feels about their own identity without them explicitly saying it, which is why we must rely on everything else. A few people have taken to place their own idea of Kris upon them, to the detriment of the conversation. There has been especially a large amount of discourse around using the correct pronouns associated with Kris. Kris uses they/them pronouns, and despite not being the only character who does this, there are those who refuse to accept this information. The conversation seems to have subsided due to the firm reinforcement of this information from within the community. However, I find it very important to highlight when discussing the identity of Kris. What and who you are can go hand in hand. For example, Kris is a human in a monster town, so they understand the isolation of not fully fitting in with their monster family. Art is something that can be left for interpretation, and there are countless things a person could attach to something they enjoy. However, when it comes to the absolute denial of a clear fact regarding a character, interpretation does not bear any weight whatsoever. Kris uses they/them pronouns. If you disagree, then you don't care enough to understand them, and you probably don't even want to understand them. This is integral to how people connect with Kris, as well as how their identity is purposefully unaligned with the typical binary structure. Also, peep this.
He's stuck in a
He's stuck in a cutscene. You can't do it.
Kris cannot reach
You
it.
can't do it.
They're stuck.
This is a clip of the literal creator of the game correcting other people who are calling Kris the wrong pronoun. If this doesn't convince you, nothing will. So anyway, you don't even have to associate this with the idea of being envy. You can just see this as Kris being a human in a monster town, and just from that you understand their isolation. There are basic and psychological differences that are of no fault of either party. However, they do generate a sense of division between the two. Toriel and Asgore have trouble understanding their human child, whether it's Asgore being too intrusive with physical affection or Toriel disregarding Kris leaving for long periods of time. No matter how you see Kris's life or how you personally identify, we can understand their isolation firsthand. This is what creates what I call a narrative bridge. The average Joe Schmo can understand the concept of a human in a monster town, because more than likely, Joe is human. Then, when a person who associates with Kris for the same reason due to their own specific divergence, Joe can get perspective on what that life is like. People who don't adhere to gender normality can sometimes feel isolated, and Deltarune makes them feel seen. This is honestly really cool, as it's one of the primary benefits of analyzing art, using engaging storytelling to give the audience a sense of perspective they wouldn't normally have. I'm not going to pretend that just by playing Deltarune you know everything there is to know about being non-binary, but perspective is gained. And through perspective, we can all understand each other a little more. It was a very good decision to make most of the people in Hometown accepting of Kris. It really helps to highlight that there is a difference between accepting someone and understanding them. There are several monsters in town who are welcoming to Kris. However, if you were to ask them what they were all about, I doubt they would be able to tell you. This doesn't just stop at Kris not conforming to gender norms. Their story also embodies how Kris doesn't conform to societal expectations. The clear environmental storytelling of Azrael having all the awards tells us that physical and quantifiable accomplishments are not something that Kris values. Society measures the worth of a person in several ways: money, status, lineage, and of course, accomplishments. It is understood in several spaces of the modern day that if you want to be regarded as amazing, you must do amazing things. If you want to be acknowledged, you must work hard and be quote-unquote successful. I hope people know this by now, but Kris is actually very talented. They are agile, creative, resourceful, and very empathetic. Kris did not receive any trophies or accomplishments, not because they failed, but rather they just didn't want them. My takeaway from this: Kris doesn't value people based on accomplishments or financial viability. They value the person intrinsically, looking beyond what a person is to try to understand them on a personal level. This is just one interpretation though. It could be equally likely that Kris does feel a sense of inferiority towards their older brother, simply because they were not talented in the correct way. When it comes to measuring success, the criteria of this can sometimes feel very specific. We don't know this, so this is just an assumption, but the majority of Azrael's awards were probably from more socially acceptable talents, like singing or sports. Asking around town, it seems like there are several people who miss Azrael. Kris's brother has made quite the name for himself before he left for college, and it could be interpreted that at times Kris may feel inferior to Azrael, as not only does Azrael have this great reputation, he is a monster. Now before people get the wrong idea, no, I don't think Kris's parents don't love them because they are human. Rather, I wouldn't put it past Kris to feel this way, as I have already mentioned, their isolation. There is a silver lining, or in this case a purple lining, with Kris's #1 bully. In all the times that Susie bullied Kris, they never retaliated. Most likely because Kris understood that Susie was also coming to grips with her own self, both the one that was forming as well as the one which people have placed upon her. The initial scene regarding the chalk tells us so much in regards to Susie's opinion of herself. She knows that she can get in trouble for taking the chalk, and she is under the impression that this will be the final straw. Fully under the assumption that the world is preying on her downfall, she now sees this human as someone who has leverage over her. Susie's self-image is a result of her own understanding of identity. The only people in their class who do not have a negative opinion of her would be Noelle and Kris. However, Susie doesn't even know how Kris really feels. There is this sense of isolation you feel when you think everyone is against you, and it's only worse when you have evidence that it's true. Whether it's Snowdrake's line of "you Suze, you lose," or just the fact that Susie is new here, it would be next to impossible for her to not feel left out. Any attempt that Susie makes to connect with people has backfired tremendously, causing Susie to believe that Undyne and Alphys hate her. I highly doubt that either of them hate her, and I don't know about you guys, but I'm still holding out for the perfect ending. The one where Undyne and Alphys get together and they adopt Susie. Like, honestly, they would make the perfect family. Unfortunately, it's a pipe dream for now, considering Undyne is captured. Susie comes to grips with her own understanding of self in her own way. At times, she can be observed as defensive, We see ample examples of this in her arguments with Ralsei. Ralsei had only just met Susie to tell her that she has a responsibility to this prophecy. The disagreement between these two comes from several failures in communication. Ralsei's understanding of himself is to the degree of utility. He sees himself as a hero of the prophecy, a label he accepts with pride and sees it as the greatest honor one could have. Early Chapter 1 Ralsei was so certain that Susie and Kris would have loved to jump at the chance to be a part of this adventure. Yet, they don't. Kris seems to be unresponsive, which Ralsei also assumes is them just accepting their role. Susie's story is a representation of how the thoughts and labels of others can skew your own sense of self. The vilification of oneself can be caused by the treatment of others. It's a self-repeating cycle. Susie is mean to people, so they distance themselves from her, and because they are distant, she thinks they hate her, so she is mean to them, and so on. This more than likely started small, but it really shows how your environment can have a profound effect on your identity as well. The reason why Susie utilizes fear is because it keeps working. The other students are afraid of her. Her teacher is apprehensive of her, so she clings to this fear like a safety blanket. Only when she meets Lancer does she begin to mellow out. Lancer isn't afraid of her. This avenue of expression meets a dead end the moment he started to idolize her. In Chapter 4, Susie explains how she felt like she had to be tough, like it was a mold she was forced into. A predetermined understanding of herself influenced by the treatment of those around her. It doesn't fully excuse Susie's actions, however, it does explain them. Ralsei's struggle with personality is especially challenging, as his existence is so new. He is a darkener with a specific purpose, and that purpose is to serve the light. His aspirations are null, and his motivations are given to him. His life is defined by what he is, almost entirely as he sees but a singular outcome approaching. Ralsei is meant to guide the Lightners in any way he can, so he sees fit to encourage them to resolve conflict peacefully. His approach is a direct result of his experience, which is almost non-existent. Ralsei simply doesn't understand people, oblivious to the fact that he's doing more harm than good. Interestingly, he doesn't get too deep into the moral aspects of Susie's actions. Like he never tries to argue that what Susie is doing is morally wrong. This could potentially be because this is a morally gray issue. Susie is being overtly aggressive. However, she was attacked first. What really sets her off is how Ralsei bluntly says that whether Susie agrees with the prophecy or not, she should act as the prophecy tells her to. So not only do we have an instance of Ralsei telling Susie to be something she doesn't want to be, but he also criticizes her for not adhering to the label he has placed. I'd probably tell Ralsei to shove off too. Contrary to how it may be presented, this story is not one of solid dark and light. Your environment is a determining factor of who you are, but the end-all be-all decision is on the individual. This is the lesson which Susie learns, when she refuses to follow through with taking Lancer's life. Lancer was a glimmer of hope for Susie, a display of how one person can change another. Despite any misunderstanding, this sense of attachment echoed through Susie's mind when she fought Lancer. At the end of it all, she chose not to kill him, and that is who Susie is. She chose mercy, and she will continue to choose. That is the beauty of identity. After everything, it's still you. It's up to you to decide who you are. Kris and Susie are our vehicles used to explore the world of Deltarune. As time has passed, it has been proven further and further that a connection exists between them. At pivotal moments, we can have Kris close their eyes and move our consciousness over to Susie. More accurately, it is the player who is moving their consciousness over to Susie. These moments are almost always used to supply context for Susie's arc. While this could be seen as just a narrative tool to allow for more flexibility, I would argue it is for a specific reason. These two characters share a connection. Whether the player is utilizing that connection or the player is that connection really is anyone's guess. We are a visitor in this land, and Kris is our primary connection to it, although it has become clear that this connection passes on to Susie, which is what allows us to periodically experience the story from her perspective. The answer eludes us for now, so for now I would discuss the decision-making process behind this. I would wager this narrative choice gives a certain utility. At specific moments, we will need to see what Susie is doing for context. Imagine playing through Chapter 1 and not seeing the scene where Susie and Lancer fight. That is a fundamental part of her arc, which the player would just not know about. It's not anything groundbreaking to see a story from another character's perspective, although the added context of Ralsei inciting this is unique to be sure. He prompts this shift in narrative perspective, either because he is trying to follow the script or he is trying to encourage this hypothetical connection between the protagonists. Maybe it's a little bit of both. As we continue to explore the world of Deltarune, a rule has been established and has remained consistent. The narrative shift is between Kris and Susie's perspective. The only moment which briefly breaks this rule is when we shift over to Noelle in Chapter 2. However, I would imagine this is because Susie is already on her way. If I had to decide on an answer, I would wager that the player is the connection. Now the question becomes, why Kris and Susie specifically? As I mentioned, this narrative decision offers some kind of utility for Toby Fox. There are several reasons why we can see Kris and Susie's perspective, some more ideal than others. Going down the list, I think I'll start with the least enjoyable option. Kris is not doing well. You don't have to be a doctor to see the potential health ramifications of jamming your hand into your chest and ripping out a soul. They seem relatively spry, jumping and running, almost like they have superhuman strength and reflexes, but it seems to contradict them falling over in Chapter 4. Regardless, I think it's safe to assume Kris's body is deteriorating. There is a looming possibility of Kris not making it to the end of this story. Either through their own actions or just the dangers of their work, it is becoming more and more likely that something is going to happen to them. If something ever did happen to Kris, Susie would be there to take over as our main protagonist. Some people argue that she already has. A slightly altered version of this idea would be more ideal. Speaking mainly for myself, I don't want the roaring to happen, and I don't want anything bad to happen to our dear protagonists. However, given Kris's potential motivation, I think a pragmatic decision is on its way. Kris is doing something specific, and they do not want us to stop them from doing it. And I can only imagine if we knew what Kris was planning, then yeah, we would probably try to stop them. Now I should make it clear, I don't think Kris is bad or evil or anything of the sort. However, I could see them being manipulated to do something drastic if they thought their family was in danger. We may be given a choice down the line to go against Kris, using Susie as our new operator. Even if we aren't given the choice, Susie might just end up with the soul, considering this panel in Chapter 4. Realistically, I can't say Toby Fox would know what every player would want to choose, so it probably won't be up to us. I believe the majority of people would side with Susie, and when things go wrong, we would have to switch to her as a means to allow the story to continue. There is a lot of anticipation surrounding the inevitable breaking point of Kris and Susie. These two have garnered a large amount of trust, and with Chapter 4, we see that Kris has made promises to someone else. Their allegiance is not to the prophecy, but to the mayor, and many people have speculated this would lead to Susie turning her back on them, having felt betrayed herself. As I have argued before, I don't think Susie is that unforgiving. There is a possibility that she could convince her friend to help her. And what better way to put their heads together than to literally put their heads together? We have heard of a monster-human fusion in Undertale, but we have yet to see it truly visualize. It was only hinted at in Undertale, but we never saw it happen. I should say, I'm biased towards this specific idea, and I would say this is the theory that I support the most. And even more unfortunately, I don't really have too much evidence backing it up, aside from maybe a few visual clues. I just think it's a cool idea. Kris and Susie fuse together to stop the roaring. Using their newfound power, they would be more than enough to stop the Knight, or any of the Titans for that matter. A pragmatic decision that would require both of them to lose their individuality. The moving of perspective in this scenario would be foreshadowing to a literal connection forming between them within the narrative, as in the story follows both of these characters coming together. When we speculate on the decision of including two main characters, we don't even have to assume of the utility of offering multiple perspectives. These characters have already been separated at certain times, which we have been able to follow and maintain context. Whether this two-protagonist system is working towards a big payoff remains to be seen. And of course, we haven't even touched on the possible ramifications of the weird route. No matter what, it is very clear that two perspectives of the story have been established. So, the way I see it, either these two perspectives will stay separated, and we will follow one of them, or these two perspectives will come together, forming a brand new existence altogether. Deltarune is not a sequel to Undertale, yet with being a Toby Fox work, we naturally see a crossover of themes and narrative throughlines. At times, I feel like Chapter 1 is a direct response to Undertale itself. In Undertale, you had 3 options. Well, technically you had several options, but you get what I'm trying to say. You could be a true pacifist, you could go genocide, or you would be neutral. I would say that the majority of people, Toby Fox included, prefer the true pacifist route. However, there comes a debate when the topic of true pacifism comes into discussion. And I feel like the discourse between Susie and Ralsei represent this wonderfully. The conversation of mercy versus spare. The reason why I bring this up is because Undertale never really has a chance to fully develop this argument. Is the human child justified in killing monsters to defend themselves, or are they morally liable for every monster they kill? Deltarune Chapter 1 was host to an unofficial debate between two characters. This disagreement sparks conflict within the story before a conclusion of compromise is arrived on both sides. Ralsei, our Prince of Darkness, has his own agenda and desire. He asks both Kris and Susie to spare as many enemies as we can. Naturally, we learn his motive is to change the course of fate. However, just going off his base personality, I'd wager he is a pacifist by trade. Being the group healer and using mostly non-lethal spells, Ralsei is the cooperative voice of reason, which eventually clashes with Susie. Susie Deltarune is a leery, abrasive warrior. Her self-worth is in the red, and she has already assumed the world is against her. Refusing to accept the call to adventure, it is clear that Susie's interests align with herself. I should make myself clear up front. Out of every character's actions in Chapter 1, I have always found Susie's to be the most realistic. Like, this is a straight-up isekai with monsters and spells and whatnot. People are attacking you. Of course you're gonna fight back. I will say, before we get into the actual conversation, I will admit I am biased towards Susie's side. As a result, I may be more in favor of her side of the argument, but I will attempt to be neutral. I called this debate unofficial because there isn't really a chance for either party to have a thorough conversation with full arguments and such. However, both sides do give their basic argumentative reasons for the choices they make. Ralsei argues that we should treat every Darkner with kindness by merit of role. He is the Dark Prince. With this title, he understands it as a title of importance and responsibility. His goal is to bring peace and to build his kingdom. A prince without subjects is no prince at all. Through kind acts and cooperation, he has a chance to bring darkness to his side, building an army of loyal subjects while pacifying any aggression. I really don't mean to label Ralsei as an opportunist, I just want to highlight he does have objective reasons for doing what he does. I will also say he is genuinely concerned with the needs of the Darkners. As a means to bring a peaceful resolution, he tries to address the king's concerns. Obviously they fall on deaf ears, or no ears, but I think it's clear that he wants people to be happy. The king is the only Darkner he has imprisoned, and that is for obvious reasons. Every other Darkner appears to have their needs met with no complaints. Ralsei is looking for subjects, however I don't believe he wants total subservience. He would not want a Darkner to live in Castletown unless they already wanted to do so, which is why he asks Kris specifically to recruit more Darkners rather than doing it himself. Susie is in full preservation mode, which is the motive for almost all of her violent acts. Obviously, she didn't sign up for this Lightner prophecy, so to tell her she has to go along with it is just assumptive and kind of obnoxious. Susie has her own problems, and it's not like the world is up in arms trying to solve them. The conversation here is so much more complex than, you are hurting people, stop hurting people because that's bad. The epicenter of this argument lies within the question of self-defense. Are you morally obligated to end conflict peacefully despite not being the one to initiate the conflict in the first place? You could be forgiven acting in self-defense of yourself and those you care about, yet this is not exactly what Susie does, and it is certainly not her motivation. Yes, the Darkners of Card Kingdom attack Susie, and yes, the engagements are implied to be completely unfair. Ralsei and Kris were made to fight 2 to 3 Darkners at a time, an uneven matchup. If Susie was given the same treatment, you could see her actions as justified. This is not to say that Susie is exclusively a victim. She does possess the strength to fight back, with striking levels of effectiveness. So now we are left with the question: are you always within your right to defend yourself if you are being attacked, regardless of how strong the assailants are? It should be noted that in the situation which our heroes find themselves in is not a one-to-one with Undertale. Our protagonists are young, but not as young as Frisk was, and while the Darkners do attack with intent to kill, they make it very clear it is because they were ordered to do so. For this question, I find it best to establish the full context. Through unknown means, Susie is sent here against her will, and once she gets here, she almost immediately gets attacked. She's not looking for a fight, she's hiding because she's now in a strange world which she has zero context of. All Susie wants to do is go home. Whatever this is, it's not somewhere Susie wants to be. Susie is apprehensive of her situation, yet she does have the physique to defend herself. Susie is strong, like crazy strong. Lancer, the Rudins, the Hathies, and several other Darkners couldn't match Susie in raw strength. We can see that despite being outnumbered, Susie easily defeated them all. And once they were defeated, Susie moved on. Most, if not all of these engagements were in self-defense. Despite being ordered to do so, the Darkners still made a choice to follow those orders and attack Susie. Therefore, despite Susie's strength, I would say she was 100% in her right to defend herself. The argument for self-defense only applies to the King's Darkners. It does not necessarily apply to C-Round. And while we have a chance, can we talk about C-Round? They never speak, and Lancer is afraid of them, so they're not a part of the King's forces? If C-Round was loyal to the King, then I don't think Lancer would be afraid of them, and I don't think Rule's card would have to use some kind of weird crown to control them later on. This is where the conversation becomes more complex, because as the flavor text explains, the C-Round is trying to attack you. It's just not doing a very good job. Susie had the means to end the fight peacefully, and she was virtually in zero danger, yet she chose to respond with violence regardless. Obviously, we understand that the reason why she did this is because she's in full self-preservation mode. What was that saying again? When you're a bat, everything looks like a ball. Susie's refusal to properly discuss the issue doesn't really help her side, and only serves to make her look like she's in the wrong. But like she says much later, it's complicated. A large percentage of the resolution flows from a revelation which Susie comes to. Basic understanding for some, life-changing lesson for her. Susie makes a friend, this friend who values her, and when she is faced with the idea of betrayal, she turns to violence once again. With this, we understand Susie further. She turns to violence as a method of self-preservation. She's just a kid. A big kid, but, you know, this world frightens her, and violence was a method she used to keep the Darkners at bay. And it just kept working. So effective, it made her feel safer, made her feel in control. The fear she instilled in the Darkners has allowed Susie to get away from them, thus reducing her own fear. Or so she thinks. You see, the antithesis of fear is not strength, but understanding. Through understanding, Lancer became Susie's friend. She grew to understand him and trust him. This is real trust. Trust through understanding, which formed a friendship. Ralsei's definition of friendship is a tad skewed at this point in the story. He thinks a friendship would blossom as long as two people are nice to each other. This isn't necessarily an incorrect assessment, but it missed a very crucial step. To truly be someone's friend, a sense of understanding must be known. Interests and ideals help in this, and even when you understand these, it may still be impossible to find common ground. Ralsei is trusting of people without knowing them. Susie is distrustful of people without knowing them. Two extreme sides of the Undertale argument. Most of Ralsei's actions involve trying to convince Susie to stop fighting. While this goal is not selfish, the way it is executed lacks a mutual understanding. Ralsei did not attempt to understand how afraid Susie was, and honestly I don't think he does even now. But what he does learn eventually is that sometimes people don't listen to reason. Being nice can get you into the good graces of people, yet not everyone is so easily swayed. The king can be dealt with either way, yet when he is beaten, Ralsei makes the decision to heal the king without much convincing. Ralsei is not a bad person by any means, and I cannot stress this enough, he is simply ignorant. Being nice to everyone is a fair motive, and the world could use more nice people. Yet Ralsei learns today what happens when you are nice to the wrong person. I will admit, it can sometimes feel impossible to know who to trust and who to fight. We live in a world of deception and guile, where those who appear the most trustworthy will hurt us the most. I have learned this, and some of you may have learned this. Susie's reason for being violent was for the sake of self-preservation, yet it was also taken to such an extreme to where even the harmless were treated as genuine threats. Ralsei thought that if one were to simply be nice and work with others, a happy ending would be waiting around the corner. Who was correct in the end? As the game concludes, neither. When all is said, I think Susie and Ralsei coming to a conclusion together fits best, and it really highlights how wise Susie can be if given the chance. There are those in this world who will attack you, and while yes, the context as to why matters, you have the responsibility to defend yourself as needed. This debate concludes along with Susie's arc for the chapter. Defending oneself is fine. However, when you're a bat, everything looks like a ball. Susie's arc is about trust and how that trust can be rewarded or punished. It's a scary fact of life, but sometimes you just don't know if you're trusting the right person. But regardless, it's important not to lose that trust. Otherwise, you'll hurt those closest to you. Jevil is the first of many secret bosses we meet throughout the course of Deltarune. He is the court jester who has found himself confined for his crimes. Jevil can be found after using the elevator to go to the unknown floor within the card castle. When meeting him, he is distraught for the world around him. He is upset over the fact that the world will never know true freedom. He is the only Darkner who is free, an antithetical conclusion based on his current situation. The Fun Gang attempts to explain how misguided he is. Being the one behind bars, Jevil is in fact trapped. Jevil's solidarity has still left him upset, so he asks for the Lightners to join him. Sham is our first merchant, and they have an adequate level of history with Jevil. Sham is incredibly pessimistic. It really doesn't concern them if we spring Jevil. Strange, considering they were the one to help imprison Jevil in the first place. The key to Jevil's cell was broken into 3 pieces, the first of which was kept by Sham themselves. Once you defeat the Jester, you can return to Sham, who gives further perspective of their history. The two serve the kings of this world in the royal court, companions who spent so much time playing games together. Sham details of a person who Jevil met that changed him fundamentally. They explain that Jevil was speaking in games. Life was nothing more than a game to Jevil, so as a result, he had to be locked up. With the discovery that Jevil is now gone, Sham reflects on the time they spent with Jevil. Their friendship left a lasting impression, so they feel a sense of regret. At least, I think they do. Like I said, Sham is very pessimistic. Jevil is the beginning of a long trend, which has seemingly been consistent as more chapters release. The Knight, which is to be the main villain of Deltarune, has been slowly but surely creating agents. The understanding which I have come to is that the Knight shows up, picks out a Darkner. That Darkner may be chosen for a specific reason, but for now we'll just assume that it's at random. The Knight gives them a shadow crystal which may or may not be a literal part of themselves. This shadow crystal is solid determination, which has been concentrated. Sheer exposure to this determination has a profound effect on the Darkner's mind. Jevil begins to see his life as a game, which potentially prompted him to start attacking people at random. This is the prominently accepted understanding of events, which admittedly was a big surprise to me. In my recent Anatomy of Dark Worlds video, I completely left out the idea that Jevil was attacking people, mostly because I did not assume that this was the case in the slightest. When Jevil attacks the group, he equates the situation to a simple numbers game. This is most likely the primary reason people have assumed Jevil was imprisoned. I will say I don't necessarily agree with the idea that Jevil started attacking people at random. I think it's just a tad bit more complicated than that. Before you even meet Jevil, Sham alludes to a time where there was a lot of chaos, which I personally interpreted as a time where Jevil was turned loose, free to do whatever he wanted. I don't think this necessarily means that Jevil was attacking people indiscriminately, rather he began to refrain from showing any sense of self-control. He was the court jester, so he did anything and everything he could to get a laugh, regardless of how it affected other people. The king, known for his short patience, more than likely had Jevil locked up because of his dangerous habits. A conclusion I only came to recently, but honestly I feel like it fits better than Jevil just started attacking people. None of the other Shadow Crystal bosses were cited to attack people, so why would learning that his life is a game make Jevil sadistic? I should mention, I'm not trying to argue that Jevil didn't attack anyone ever. I'm sure he did. I would just argue it was a little bit more complicated than that. Determination seems to have an effect on the Darkners. Strange, considering as far as we know, Darkners are made of darkness themselves. Jevil in particular came to the realization that his life was a game. As someone operating from the outside, I would say that is correct. Deltarune is a video game with stats and code and win conditions. Basic video game mechanics for us is just the laws of physics for them. This is nothing new to Toby Fox games. Characters who are more in the know about gameplay and the overall systems are more powerful. This knowledge is correct, however, the truth of it is contrary to their entire life. To wake up one day and find out your entire existence is just a game can be eye-opening in all the wrong ways. No wonder they go insane. And being abandoned by your friends doesn't really help either. It would seem that the Shadow Crystals are moving towards something, and I have a vague idea what that something is. So many of the secret bosses follow a trend of freedom, signified by the freedom motif used in their battle themes. Brief side note, the freedom motif is a fan-made name. Unless I'm mistaken, I don't think Toby Fox ever refers to that motif as the freedom motif. So for all we know, it could be symbolizing something completely different. Freedom as it stands is dependent on the person, and the question of whose freedom will more than likely fall to Kris. The Shadow Crystals are going to Kris, and strangely, we are entrusting them to Sham. I'm sure this is fine and Sham wouldn't just take the crystals, right? You know, I'm sure Sham can be trusted. Honestly, that's neither here nor there. What's really important is the question of the Shadow Crystal's purpose. The crystals are solidified determination, so I can only imagine that the combination of all of them is akin to gathering the determination in one place, gathering power, gathering control. Either way you look at it, the pure crystal will result from all of the shards coming together, and it will give the owner incredible power. I would reckon that power to be enough for one to overcome the boundaries of the game itself, using enough determination. Through the combination of the wills of so many wishing for freedom, I believe this is the fate that awaits us, transcending the game and finally achieving freedom for Kris and maybe even December. The final Shadow Crystal will be ours in Chapter 5, so it really won't be too long before we have our answer. Let's talk about the prophecy for a bit. This plot point is introduced in Chapter 1, however it doesn't fully develop until Chapter 4. To account for this, I will only discuss the setup for the prophecy, as well as the typically understood expectations that are almost always associated with prophecy within a given narrative. This will of course give me the chance to talk about the Deltarune prophecy again in the Chapter 4 video, and cover all the ways the prophecy was potentially changed. As far as prophecies go, the one found in Deltarune is rather generic, as if the details were intentionally withheld. I wonder if there's a reason it feels that way. A prophecy is typically something that characters in-universe are aware of, yet it may never be fully explained to the audience. Within Deltarune, the prophecy is explained to our protagonists very early. It should be noted that there were several details about said prophecy that Ralsei intentionally left out, but regardless, Susie, being one of the mentioned chosen ones, decides to ignore the prophecy, opting to leave instead. This is one of many examples of a prophecy being subverted from what was understood to happen, and I would also like to highlight that Susie was the one to do it. If I'm being realistic, most prophetic predictions are an opportunity for the writer to subvert the audience's expectations. So much so, I feel it's more rare to see a prophecy happen exactly as described rather than be altered. The writer is literally telling you something will happen, so what better way to keep you on your toes than to just be like, haha, that actually will not happen. This is, I suppose, where I should mention that the power of vagueness can really help a prophecy plot point. Prophecies are prophesized to happen. However, there is no specific time frame given. Really, this is just a means to mess with expectations again. Expectations is the key word here. Prophecy and those who follow it have expectations simply because that is what they have been told. When someone is told to do something, as opposed to deciding to do it themselves, the context changes. Instead of allowing the person to make a decision based on their morals, ideals, and personal motive, you have now foregone all of that with a command. Obviously, the person in question has to decide whether to follow this command, and as you may have guessed, Susie is not one to just follow orders. Then we have the added nuance that the knowledge of a prophecy could lead someone to try and change it. In the video game God of War Ghost of Sparta, Kratos, our main character, has recently been crowned as the new God of War. However, he has been recently experiencing visions about his mortal brother, Deimos. Deimos was captured by the gods as a child, taken away from his family because the gods sought to stop a prophecy from happening. This prophecy foretold that a marked warrior from Sparta will destroy Olympus. Deimos had a birthmark above his eye, so the gods assumed that that was he who would destroy Olympus. However, little did they know, in taking Deimos, they made an enemy of Kratos, the person who would actually go on to fulfill the prophecy. Kratos had many reasons for destroying the gods. However, the obvious point to highlight is that those who seek to stop fate may just as easy bring it about with their actions. We can clearly see where the gods messed up here. Well, technically most of them. You see, you actually find out that Athena knew that Kratos was the right person, but she lied to Ares, so they took Deimos instead. Still messed up though, even though they technically did the wrong thing because of Athena. Ralsei is a firm believer in the prophecy, and it ends up driving Susie away. Whenever a prophecy is introduced into a story and the main characters know about it, this mainly acts as a motivator for our hero's actions. Ralsei would not have pushed so hard for Kris and Susie to just be nice to everyone if he didn't have his previously acquired knowledge of said prophecy. The question which follows is whether this is the correct reaction to this information. Is it wise to adhere your actions to a tale that, for all you know, was written for someone else? Context of prophecy is very important, as it gives people the means to understand it. For example, we have no idea who made the prophecy of Deltarune, therefore we don't understand why or how it was made. In the God of War series, the prophecy is told by oracles, who each possess their own agenda. Fate can be a fickle thing, and while an event may appear to be inevitable, it is always interesting to explore how people may change the way they act, either to stop prophecy or to enforce prophecy. The purpose of applying a prophecy to a piece of fiction could be for several reasons. However, I find the primary message to always be to spark the conversation between hard determinism and free will. Ralsei represents the deterministic side, while Susie is an example of free will. Determinism is a philosophical school of thought in which the person believes that human actions and decisions are causally inevitable, cause and effect. This thought process states that when someone makes a decision, it is impossible that they could have made any other decision in that moment, as they were predetermined to make it. Effectively, this would mean that any action you take was one you always were going to make, which takes away any agency you would have over your own actions. Pure causality dictates your actions like a simple chain of logic. 1 leads to 2, which leads to 3, and will always lead to 4 because that is the next event to happen. Free will is in opposition to this, as it states that people are responsible for, and have the capacity to, make choices and actions independent of any previous event. For example, if you were a fisherman your entire life, that means you can decide to be a barber whenever you damn well please. Free will directly opposes any prophecy as it denies the underlying causality of it. The prophecy foretold an event to happen, so this could very well mean it will happen. Ralsei has decided to equate the prophecy as fact, thus forgoing free will altogether. Personally, I am more fond of free will, as it allows us to retain agency over our actions. Still, there is a fundamental aspect which Ralsei has not foreseen. A person's actions and personality are in direct correlation with their nature. Some may say they are the exact same thing. If a person is to change the outcome of their life, they must change who they are. Change takes time, introspection, and understanding. When Susie decides to stop the king without violence, she has undergone a change in nature. Susie has made the decision to change herself. You may think that this undermines the argument of free will, as Susie is making the decision to listen to Kris, which has now solidified her place within the prophecy. However, to explain why that is wrong, I will have to continue this conversation with my video on Deltarune Chapter 4, which could very well be a few months from now. Just to reiterate, almost everything I talked about in this section is only set up for what I'll talk about in the Chapter 4 video. Moving on. Susie is a god. And no, I don't mean that metaphorically, rhetorically, hypothetically, or poetically. Susie is a god in the Deltarune universe. Straight up. Well, maybe not straight up, but so anyway. As far as idealistic Deltarune theories go, this is probably the craziest one that I have decided to spearhead. I will say that this theory has evolved in my eyes as time has passed, but I just cannot see any other explanation. In the past, I held my reservations as to not jump to conclusions. However, I'd say Susie is by far the strongest member of the group, and even rivals the abilities of Genocide Ralsei, potentially even surpassing him. Maybe people in the community have settled on the idea that Susie only has a marginal level of influence over the game due to an abundance of determination. While I would agree her powers come from her determination, I am certain at this point that it goes beyond just simple influence. Before I start to list my evidence, I want to explain what I mean when I say God. Understandably, when people hear the word God, they assume the idea of a Christian or Muslim God. However, I am not speaking with a religious mindset. I know I mention religion every so often in my videos, but you should all know I'm not a very religious person whatsoever. Any details I mention regarding any religion are usually the result of research as to not misunderstand this facet of human culture. I realize in hindsight that this may make me appear as some kind of religious expert, but I can assure you I am not. What is a god? A spirit or being that has great power or wisdom. Already, Susie has displayed both great power and great wisdom, but also she has displayed many instances of self-doubt. Doubt is almost certainly the antithesis to determination, and as I will explain, this is why Susie has remained ignorant to her power. She is a god, ignorant to her full potential. Let's discuss how the world of Deltarune works. As I mentioned in the beginning, the world of Deltarune is a program running on our computer. We connect to the world via our soul, which is displayed by the fact that we can move the soul independently from Kris's body. At this point, it's clear that we are the soul and not Kris, yet the framework of this world goes beyond that. The game menu is something we see, and is something that has a level of control over the game world. It is one of the many avenues which we use to interact with the world of Deltarune. This means that the game menus and systems are diegetic within the narrative. If something is diegetic in regards to a piece of fiction, that means it is existing or occurring within the world of a narrative rather than something that is external to that world. The reason why Deltarune's game menus are diegetic, even though most characters cannot see them, is because we can see them, and we are a character within this story. We are a character within this narrative. We are connected to the world Gaster has brought us here, and through this connection, we are now a literal player in this story, and we can see the in-game menus, thus making them diegetic. The fantastical world of Deltarune is its own dimension, a separate plane. We know it as a simple video game that some people have made YouTube videos about. However, within the narrative of the game itself, we are using the program to temporarily exist within this world. Things like game menus, number values, and such are all intrinsically tied to the deeper systems which allow Deltarune to function. Any level of control over these systems would mean that person has a systemic level of control over the world. We are also a god, as we have absolute control over the process of the Deltarune game. We can reach our intrusive hand into the game files, pull out little Ralsei, and make him do a funny little dance like this. Look at him go. We have this control, so we are regarded as a god, considering the level of power we possess over the game world. Remember, I said great power or great wisdom. Sometimes you don't get both. Let's say for a second, hypothetically, Susie never did what she did. Let's say she actually allowed us to answer every question she asks in Chapter 1. We, the god of this world, are presented with a choice. This choice will directly influence the narrative, vastly insignificantly, or some middle in between. Through this simple act of choosing a dialogue, we have decided how Kris would feel about their current circumstances, perhaps even changing the way which Susie reacts afterwards. In making this choice, we would have altered the narrative in the way we wanted to. Yet that choice was ripped away from us, by none other than Susie. Susie can stop us from making choices. She proceeds to do this again and again as the game continues. This isn't some parlor trick or a subversion for the sake of subversion. Susie has control over the game itself. This doesn't just stop at the game's menus, she commands the game with her words as well. Traveling through the Scarlet Forest, you find the Bloxer enemy. Typically, you would only fight this enemy with Ralsei, so very few people would actually see this interaction. After Susie joins the party for real this time, you can now go back and fight the Bloxer with Susie. Now that Susie is here, you can use the rival act from the menu. After doing this, Susie will say one of a few lines, and then, still speaking, she will say, "The enemies became tired." Nothing physically prompted this, however, it happens regardless. You can hear the sound of Susie's dialogue, and you can see her face within the portrait. Susie states something to happen, and the game makes it so. This is not a misunderstanding or a glitch or a mistake. Susie specifically says that the enemies get tired, and it just happens. The world of Deltarune itself is subservient to her, and the only question which follows is, where did she even come from? Susie's origins have been kept vague intentionally, and from what I see, this is only the beginning of what she can do. She is a player in this game, just like us. Our player 2, if you will. Although at times it kind of feels like we are player 2. One can only speculate how powerful Susie will become. Is this a massive setup for her to take control of the game completely? Is this some kind of get out of jail free card for Susie to just whip out some crazy game-breaking powers to win or something? The solution lies in the future. However, I feel it important to make a note of this incredible plot epiphany now, if not only for the sake of spectacle. Like I said, Susie is awesome. And here we arrive at the narrative conclusion. Every journey begins with a single step, and this was a fantastic step. The character work, the thematic resonance, the compelling mystique of the plot. Chapter 1 is literally the reason we are here today. And while it may be the shortest of the chapters, it provides more than enough substance. Recording for this video is wrapping up today. However, I find that even though this is looking to be one of my biggest videos ever, there's still a couple more things I probably could have talked about. There's of course the topic of Rudy's illness. I could have potentially talked about the night a little bit more. If I remember correctly, there was an early draft in the script where I would talk about the relationship between monsters and humans. And then of course I realized we had so little information about life outside of hometown, so I decided to just cut that part out altogether. Now obviously, this is just the first step of the chapter analysis series. This is only chapter 1, the smallest chapter mind you. And whenever it comes to Noelle, we'll have plenty of Noelle stuff to talk about in chapter 2's video. I'm gonna take some time away for now, but not too much time, don't worry. If it's any consolation, the chapter 2 video is probably gonna overshadow this video by a lot. That being said, how do you guys feel like multiple parts? If I made the chapter 2 video into multiple parts, would you guys be upset? Serious question, please let me know. This was only the beginning. I find myself struggling to end scripts at times, so I think I'm just gonna end this here by saying thank you for being here. This channel is one of the few things in my life that I have control over, and it genuinely makes me happy that people enjoy what I do. Thank you all so much for watching. Goodbye. I would like to thank all of the Nighthawk channel members. Thank you Lilico. Thank you Bleed for MBG. Thank you Vantum253. Thank you Arlindos24. Thank you Kiriyami. Thank you Avast Antivirus. Thank you Savvy Sillybug. Thank you Gaston Zumbo. Thank you Weagle. Thank you, Poopy7979. Thank you, Red Leader to Base. Thank you, Flew By. Thank you, LJ Afton. Thank you all so much.